Namaste. Hello, everybody. I hope you're all having an absolutely fantabulous day, enjoying the sweetness, the sunshine where you are. I hope that your smiles are bringing you the abundance and the joy of life, and that there is a wonderful flow happening around you where you are. So yeah, it's a beautiful day here. I just had to stave off the baboons. I've got Silas in the studio with me. He's going to join us in a moment. He's grabbing himself a coffee. Wow, he's an early bird. It must be 6:30 a.m. where he is. And so we're going to be having a delightful little conversation. It's the one that we were having last week. Excuse me while I fix the scale. I'm multitasking. Apparently us men can't multitask, but this man apparently has the ability to multitask up to a point, which I think is pretty darn cool. Because, you know, who said men can't multitask? Welcome to Sim Noama. I hope you're good. I hope you're having a good, lovely, awesome day. I hope your smiles are broadening with every moment. Excuse the echo. That's just me checking that the YouTube is working and that everything's flowing as it needs to be flowing. So, astral and etheric realms and the world of abduction. This is what we're going to be discussing today. Silas, brother, let me know when you're in the studio. Silas is on coffee duty. It's that early in the morning where he is. He needs a good stiff one. So we're going to be having a conversation. I didn't put Silas's name on the bill. Darn. I just copied and pasted what I did last week. So we're going to have like basically an open conversation where we're going to be looking at the, you know, the continuation of last week's conversation or the previous week's conversation where we spoke about extra-dimensional and terrestrial beings behind the ruling class, those that are in the shadow, as it relates to the eighth sphere. And now we're going to be looking at like astral doorways as it relates to other realms, out-of-the-body abductions, etheric portals, telepathy, psychic potential within humans, mind control, how the MyLabs in the UK work and the MK Ultra in the US, and you know, there's one of those kind of operations happening in most forward-thinking countries in terms of financial. We're also going to be looking at how this all relates to the question of why humans are under the gun, as it were. We have lovely Silas in the studio. We've got Chris coming in a little while. Silas, if you don't know, you can check out his channel in my recommended channels. Silas Speaks. Actually, it's interesting. We're both like Silas Speaks, BushWhisperer Speaks. It's how I started with my lectures, which is interesting. Silas is an occultist and a writer. He's written a number of books, so you can actually go to his YouTube channel and look in the information, get the links. You can actually get some of the really interesting books he's been writing. He's been writing books on these very topics related to these phenomenon as they relate to the worldly, stage with the occult narrative that's driving all of these impulses. He's also releasing a new book very soon. So he's very busy. It's 6:30 a.m. where he is, so he's obviously an early bird. I just got down the mountain a little while ago to have fun and games with the baboons. Welcome, dear brother Silas. It's an honor to have you on the show.
It's an honor to be here. Yeah, it's going quite well. Yeah.
Lovely.
I'm feeling very fresh. I'm feeling very fresh.
Yeah, man. It's important to be fresh. I think. Like I was on the beach this morning for my sunrise, and then we climbed our mountain. We did our 6-kilometer round route in under an hour. From the beachfront to the door, to my kitchen actually, and to make a mango banana smoothie for my son and myself and his mum. So yeah, I think we've like really, we're really getting into the nitty gritty of this topic. I was having an interesting conversation in Gabriel's group, which I think is sort of on point relating to this topic, relating to the extra dimensional reality, and how much focus is on the worldly events and the stage of those which are humans, which I consider to be puppeteers of humanity, but also puppets of something else, and how all of this fits together. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, yes, absolutely. They are puppets. They're puppets of I guess, a lower impulse of man. And I mean, this is found throughout the mythologies. So even, for example, the Garden of Eden, this idea that man has fallen. And the Garden of Eden is the most potent example, because once man tries to get away from nature, tries to even rein in nature, enslave nature, vis-a-vis tools and technology, that they have to go through a cycle, and the cycle really is the fool's journey. So they take a tumble across the precipice, if you will, or whatever it may be, and they encounter basically a sort of inversion of their own spirit. And but once you get away from nature, you have to go through that process. It's a sort of a purification ritual, a grand one, on a grand civilizational scale. And of course, this is spoken of in the Yuga cycles as well. It's a linear trajectory. There's no reverse in it. It's like the spiritual journey. Once you go on that journey, there is no real going back. Once you have awoken from the dream, you can't just slip back into the dream, because the dream itself, it's congruent, or rather, it's based upon one's illusion, or one's love of the illusion of the dream. So, in that sense, yes, they are absolutely puppets of their lower impulses. They're also puppets, so they're puppets of power as well. Because once one, again, like getting away from nature and pursuing technology in an unbridled manner, once one pursues power in an unbridled manner, when you reach the state of the king of the hill, like the cartels, there's no leaving that profession. So you have to protect that power at all costs, by any means. And of course, this leads them down a very dark path. But yes, of course, they want to make everyone puppets because they themselves are puppets. So you find this with power and people that crave power, that they will always attempt to project onto, of course, their victims, exactly how they're feeling internally.
It sort of makes us wonder how it is that we've come to be that a lot of our heroes are narcissists, right? And, we look at television, we look at the characters in the films. Narcissism is being sold to us, hook, line, and sinker. And our heroes, our stars, we call them stars, which is a little bit weird. They are very often led on the garden path of narcissism. And so it's no wonder that narcissism is such a big thing in the world, why so many relationships are twisted upside down, back to front, and why people can't seem to wrap their head around the family model anymore. The nucleus family is all but corroded and being stamped into the ground. And so everybody's like continually focusing at them on the stage, the politicians, the corporations, who are the instruments of actualization of this process. Let me put that volume down. I've been multitasking here. And I think that, we do have to focus on, who is behind all of this, who is responsible, because it is rather fundamental to gain an insight into, the fingers in the world, which buttons those fingers are pressing. But we often forget that those are just fingers attached to a hand, attached to an arm, attached to a body, as an extension of a mind. Yeah. And I think that's really what I think it's what we're going to dive in here today. Chris is going to be with us in a minute. I'm just letting people know that we're live. Just while I was trying to a moment ago, but I think I dropped the. Yeah, man, I dropped the ball. But that happens. Ball dropper. I do also get this interesting impression, as I'm looking at this whole situation, that this is what actually got me started as a podcaster, right? This very topic. Because I noticed that people were using the word astral and etheric as a synonym. And this offended me to my core roots. I was like, how dare they do that? What do they think they're doing, right? To me, it seemed like the weirdest, craziest notion that we are getting taught this by our so-called teachers of the spiritual traditions. And many of these teachers are, in my opinion, and this might sound a bit harsh, they're faking it. Yeah. And unfortunately, our so-called gurus and our so-called teachers in this world, I hear people talking about Terence McKenna, and I'm not saying that he's necessarily a fake, right? But a lot of these people are pushing a similar narrative. For example, we are the ones that have created global warming. We are damaging the environment. We are hurting the ecosystem. We are reducing the number of fish in the sea. We are hacking away at our farming potential. We are creating scars on the land. We are fracking. We are hurting natural water. Yes, 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 yes. But we are not responsible for the rise in temperature on Mars, Venus, and Jupiter, and Earth. Because they correlate. They correlate. And even NASA used to have this available information up for us to be able to follow. So I think there's a lot of these narratives that are being sold to us. So someone comes, they give you a lot of good information. And then there's just that little bit of information that's twisted. And that's just enough to sort of push us into the garden path. I think this is the danger in the world that we're living in. That there are, for example, crystals. I have a love of crystals. Yeah, crystals are very close to my heart. I love these little guys. I've had a relationship with different kinds of gems since since I was a kid. I just loved the way they made me feel when I held them and touched them. And so now I see all of these crystal books are all basically pushing the exact same narrative, right? The same meanings for what crystals represent, what effects they have, what we can expect to gain from having a particular stone. And to me, it doesn't make sense. Even the colors of the chakras. I look at it and I go, who thought this crap up? This is very far from classical notions. So they took the idea of chakras from India, right? Revamped it up, changed the basis of it, packaged this idea of colors meaning this. So according to the New Age, the color violet represents the highest spiritual potential. And I'm like, well, according to psychology, the color violet and purple represents sexuality, right? Like a psychologist would say if a woman is wearing a lot of purple, that she's looking for some. Yeah? She's got a big appetite. And the color red actually represents food, right? And hunger. How do we know this? Because how many why do you think McDonald's uses red in their logo? Why is everything red? These guys have had real psychologists studying what these colors mean. And here we are being taught that red represents sexuality. It doesn't. It represents passion.
A lot of that actually, I think, descends from or derives rather from the, I forget what it is in Hebrew, but it's called the Gate of Colors, and it's a very famous Kabbalistic tome. And so that may be where the distinction comes from, some of the sort of manipulation regarding that. Yeah, I do agree. The Eastern, even China as well, they have a different understanding of these colors. As compared to us, yeah.
We have dear Chris joining us. Welcome, brother Chris. Chris is another great researcher, also very deeply embedded within the occult and the spiritual sciences. He's a lover of Steiner, I suppose we all sort of have a soft spot for Steiner because, like, let's admit it, Steiner was pretty bloody awesome. And then these Blavatsky, she had a lot to give as well. A lot of these breakaways from the Rosicrucian tradition, they were like, we're not going to be stuffy old men in cigar offices. We're going to just keep it fresh, keep it open, take a look at what the other cultures have to show and see what's common to all the different cultural legacies. So Chris is a wonderful researcher. And welcome, dear brother. Tell us about yourself while I plug my laptop in.
Oh, geez. Well, thank you for that. It's very kind. How you doing, Silas? Long time, brother.
How's it going? Yeah,
Good,
not
man.
bad.
Good. Yeah, no, sorry I'm a little late. I mean, that's just, how I am. But yeah, dude, I'm excited to have both of you in one place to talk. Should be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be brilliant.
I thought a lot of what you had in your last video, Silas, was like stuff we could maybe even bounce off and bring into this conversation, because I feel like a lot of it relates. And I mean, we go all over the place anyways here. So.
Oh yeah. Well, good. I'm in the right place then. I'm in the right place. I do that all the that last video was only meant to be about 45 minutes long, and then I just started
I saw
adding things.
Part 1, right?
And it got to 2.5 hours, and somebody in the comments was saying, you should probably make them shorter. I'm like, I'm trying. I'm really trying.
But that's how it works. Was it alive?
No. It was actually it was a video. So I had the main file I recorded. Then I was going over it, and I'm saying, yeah, I could add this, and I could add about the Vimanas, and yeah, I guess it's the nature of the occult. It's so multidisciplinary. Yeah.
It's a rabbit hole. It's a series of rabbit holes. And the thing about rabbits, very interesting when we look at rabbits as creatures. I've got a little petunia here. Firstly, they're pretty bloody vicious. We think, oh, this cute little rabbit. Rabbits, wow. Rabbits. When they get into like showdowns, it's showdowns. Rabbits get hurt. And they're highly intelligent and articulate in the way that they communicate with sound. Very interesting. If you play music, if you play guitar and sing next to a rabbit, you'll see how they change. They're very open to sound communication. They're very responsive to words. I reckon they actually have quite a vocabulary because they make these tiny little sounds that mean things. And I'm starting to learn her sounds. Like they each have their own little nuances. So yeah, I mean, rabbits are incredibly profound creatures. I think they relate to the sign of Leo. And Leo relates to the sun's potential as an inspiring light to do one's work, one's vocation. The 5th house is the house of work in our zodiac. And so it relates to that, what are we driven by, towards? What drives us? What is our life's ambition? And so we look at these concepts, and this relates to, very much Leo, which is why they say Leo tends to gravitate towards an ambitious, wanting to, rise up in corporations and become like the CEOs or whatever. So I think that these rabbit creatures are fundamental to understanding the nature of the way the mind works. And if I look at the concept of what a rabbit is, I get the impression of a creature that is really attuned to the etheric field, like highly attuned to the ethers. They are highly sensitive to movements around them, like almost like birds, right? We did a show on the music of birds. Birds are very attuned, very audio based, and the audio stream of information that comes into the consciousness tends to have a particular effect on the way the mind works. And so when we're going down a rabbit hole, it's really we're diving deep into information, and you can't speak about the occult without really linking up the correspondences. Something I want to get into is looking at
while
these.
We're on the topic of audio, before we get too far, Silas, when you were talking, I was hearing an echo. I don't know if you were, Franklin, but I
was hearing a slight echo. Yeah, I'm still. Yeah.
You hear that?
Yeah.
For me,
stop it. No, not you.
Is mine echoing?
It's just Silas when he talks, so I don't know if it's. How the heck will we stop that?
Hello. Yeah, I think the echo's coming from you, BushWhisperer.
Oh, it stopped when he muted himself.
I'll turn off my mic and you test.
Check
Yeah, go ahead.
check 1 1 2. Yeah. Yeah, I think the echo's coming from your end, man. Like I'm echoing
Yeah.
I'm echoing through your mic.
Yeah, it's your
Or
mic.
through your speaker.
Okay, I had it too loud. I was being lazy. I didn't realize. Was he echoing now? Was that good?
Check 1 1 2. Yeah, that's perfect now.
Good. I normally have it softer, my monitors. And is it just me or are you guys really soft? Chris, does Chris sound softer?
Here, let me turn off this stupid. Every time I put on the auto adjust, it does not. Let me know if this is better, or worse. Better?
Better.
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 That's better?
Much better.
Can it be louder or you think that's good?
No, it's
Can it be
perfect.
a little louder?
A little louder?
Oh, a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let me see. 1 second. How's that?
That's pretty
Better?
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to, you can even just click the settings button at the bottom and
Well,
go into
I
your
had
audio.
it on auto, and it was just like not like because I'm almost peaking on my mic here, but I don't understand.
Yeah,
what the
you'll
hell.
find that if you go off auto, and you just turn up that little dial at the bottom of the screen, it will make
That's
a
what I'm-
substantial difference, and then you can test it and see the little mic icon flash.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
like-
Oh, okay, wait. So it's still good even here, huh?
Perfect.
Really? Okay. I cranked it all the way.
Yeah.
I hear
How's it
myself
sound for
echoing.
you, Silas?
Yeah, how is
Sorry.
this, Silas?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. There's
Better?
a slight bit of white noise behind it, but it's not too bad. It's
Here, wait. Let's go down a little then. How's that? Do this.
Oh yeah.
How's that?
That's better there. Yeah, perfect.
Better.
Yeah,
Okay.
lovely.
Okay.
So, Silas,
Yeah.
tell us, what were you focusing on this long show?
Well,
What was that,
it's
brother?
Oh, I was just saying, if you hear me again being too low or too high, just let me know.
well the video was the first in probably a long series detailing the new book that I've just written there on the golden age of Saturn's America, and it's this constant referral to the golden age by Trump, and ultimately I'm beginning the journey of deciphering that and tying it back in with this. It would seem some sort of apocalypse or a sought after Armageddon state, where they can use that in an almost alchemical way to bring about a breaking down of the geopolitical order, and then the permitting of from that event, consequentially, of bringing about a sort of golden age, a utopia. I mean, there's different names for this all over the cultures, mythology, religion. Zion's another idea, of course, that's within the sort of Judeo-Christian mindset. But basically, it's discussing that, and yeah, the like what we were saying, it's like when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden. It's a sort of allegory for descending or falling away from the perfect state of nature, that people want power. They want, or not people in general, but the clique want power. They want a control over nature vis-a-vis technology, but in doing so, they make their lives more and more complex, more and more difficult. So basically, power, probably in all epochs, all ages, have sought to try and almost parse this problem that power puts forward, of this complexity. So they're attempting to simplify it, and the only way that they can do that is through this sort of insane, surreal, and quixotic notions of using technology, of course, to control man, either directly or indirectly, using propaganda, using culture creation, using all of these various, what we would call nefarious means to control man. And of course, the Golden Age is the sort of synthesis of all of this. It's the magnum opus, that's another term for it, the great work. So when they refer to their great work and the world's servers, this is what the world's servers are really serving. They're serving up serving up this dish to humanity. So yeah, it touches upon those notions.
Yeah, and then I think in the end of the video, you started getting into a little bit of how there might be like these archetypal entities that are out almost controlling things from like the etheric level or the astral level of reality, because it starts almost getting absurd in the way that things are being so controlled and people are so blind, and then we have all this technology that seems to be just coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, absolutely. You even see that with when the Americas were founded. Of course, I mean that was well understood previous to the Americas being founded by Columbus, and then, of course, Cabot with North America. So it's these same ideas that there's some form of technological disparity that perhaps they have, perhaps that they've sequestered that knowledge through the ensuing sort of civilizational epochs and these various resets. And when they reset, they wipe the simulation clean, but they maintain that knowledge. They sequester it, so it maintains that disparity. It allows them to grow their power in a sort of hidden, clandestine way. I mean, make no qualms about it. What they're after is a world government without end. They want to control every man, woman, and child from crib to cradle without let or hindrance to them. They're supremely paranoid, and of course, this paranoia has led them to a sort of hopeless desperation, where they seek they seek biodigital convergence. We can get into that too. And again, that ties into what Steiner was talking about as well, with the incarnation of Ahriman, this grand scientific deception. Again, they've already won the physical war. The physical war was won millennia ago. That was vis-a-vis fiat currency and such, and serfdom and feudalism. And what they're seeking now is a sort of victory over the spirit of humanity. So that's really what's on the table. And yeah, that's what's up. That's the stake.
I might have a bit of a jump off point for something I was just putting in the in Slick's Discord, or not Discord, it's Telegram, before, when I was listening to a part of the congressional address that Trump was giving, because he brought up the Golden Dome that he wants now over America, which I'm pretty sure we already have one of these, similar to the Iron Dome that's in Israel. But it brought me to the idea of New Jerusalem. And I was breaking down like the etymology of, because they have a New Jerusalem, the name of the city is supposed to be like Yahweh Shema, I believe.
Oh, the name of Yahweh, yeah.
Well, the name of the city is supposed to be, hold on, I lost it now. I believe it's Yahweh.
No, I mean, Yahweh Shema, I believe, is literally the name of Yahweh in Hebrew.
So they wanted this, like the New Jerusalem. They wanted that. Like I guess there's a form of either esoteric Christianity or Christianity, like with, I guess, aspects of Judaism in it. That when this New Jerusalem comes, the actual city name will be Yahweh Shema. And I mean, Shema, you break down the etymology, you can get body, tomb, token, mark, but it's basically like, so it's like the body of Yahweh. So when Trump's going the Golden Dome, and you're getting this visual of like this Golden Dome in the New Jerusalem, it's almost like he's talking about the body of Yahweh being like this digital system, this digital tomb. That's how I felt when I was listening to it.
Well, you see it even in internet or international. So to be interred in the net. I believe it was Zbigniew Brzezinski in Between Two Ages, where he discusses that this is prior to the advent of the internet, where he stated that a form of communication will come along. It will be proposed to the public. It will be proliferated and made fashionable. The public will believe it's for, in their interests, it's for their own good, but in fact it will be a way for them to be conditioned. So you see that. I mean, the sort of surreal, we call it clown world now, but the surrealist, what do you call it? Surrealist, absurd, ludicrous world that we now inhabit, both domestically, geopolitically. You could link it to what we see upon the internet. I mean, the internet over the years has become more and more, again, it's like a kaleidoscope of absurdity, really. And that seems to be bleeding over into reality too. They want to establish this virtual reality at any and all costs. So like what you're saying, they're interring people in this digitalism. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was jumping the gun. I like what you're saying about, the internet being sort of, I've often thought that the internet was created in order to prevent us from becoming conscious of the astral. Because when we become conscious of the astral, we start to actually gain a heart intelligence. And that heart intelligence, which I relate to, we call it EQ in common speak, which is probably not really, I don't think, accurate, but it's that function within the consciousness that is able to see the unity of things due to a polarized perspective that is brought into synergy. In other words, that to see the sameness in all things, the similarity. We've been taught to view distinctions. That's separate to that. That's not that. That's different to that. That's different. So this is how the ration, Rat Eon, Rat, the rat in Ganesha, the scribe of the gods, relating to the distinctions in language, as Sarasvati is holding the sitar. And so this rat, which is the steed that Ganesha rides as the proverbial Hermes of the Vedic kingdom, a rat is related to a creature that if it has a singular problem, it will look at that problem from two perspectives. Now it's got two problems. Then it will look at either of those problems from two perspectives. Now it's got four problems, and so on and so on and so on, dividing until it finds a solution. And once it finds its solution, it can overcome it. This is why rats are so insidious. They will find a way into your stores of your food. They will find a way in. They will not stop looking at every different option. And the more options they look at, the more options they will have. Namaste. Sin and Vincent, I hope you guys are well and thriving and having a lovely day. So the rat represents this ability of the mind to draw distinctions and to separate things. And so this is why Ganesha rides the rat as the scribe, because it's a fundamental function of the what we call the logos. And the logos, I believe, is the perfection of the etheric vehicle of consciousness, which is all about understanding the alpha and the omega, the distinctions between things, as opposed to that unified field that connects things, which is a purely emotional thing. And so women have this woman's instinct, woman's intuition, which is reaching into this unifying field. But we are being taught to stay away from that unified field in schools and education. They don't want us focusing on the emotional qualities and developing the artistic abilities. They want us all to be doing math, which is quite interesting. And even in the occult, it has become so dominated by this rational intellectual expose of the differences, looking at these subtle intellectual, these rationally driven arguments and ideologies and ideals. In Vedic culture and cosmology, things are very different. Things are observed through an emotional lens. And I find that very interesting. The differences between the Vedic path of practice and initiation to the Western schools of practice and initiation. And in the West, we work from the head down. If you've been trained in a Rosicrucian school, meditations, you start relaxing at the tip of your head and you work your way down to your toes. If you've been trained in a Vedic school, you start at the tip of your toes and you work your way up. In the Kabbalistic practices, you start with Keter and you work your way down to Malkut. In the Vedic tradition, you start at, Muladhara and you work your way up to Sasra. And so there's two different ways of doing this. And the Vedic system is highly emotionally, from the emotional intuitive perspective. There's less rational exposés in the Vedic tradition. It's far more difficult for Westerners to grasp these concepts because they're not spoon-fed to you in little rational intellectual arguments that you can easily grasp. They're put into these contexts that are sort of, you've got to make that emotional connection. And I think this is quite fundamental to understand that the divine feminine, as we see it's been under attack in the world, woman, right? The woman had to be put in their place, so to speak, and kept out of matters of importance. And I think that was part of a show to sort of a global ritual to help us all to repress that feminine aspect of ourselves, which is an emotional intelligence, which is actually in some way more fundamentally important when it comes to viewing the spiritual domains. What do you guys think?
I'll let you jump in, Chris.
Well, I think there might be something that Silas can speak on with this better than me, because there is the weird history of like the Hyksos and the Black Brotherhood, the Black nobility, and like this idea that there's a matriarchal line and there was once a matriarchal society that we all lived in, and that kind of flipped. Now we have to really go back and get into the works of like Michael Tazarian and stuff like that to really kind of start even understanding some of it. And I think Silas might have a better understanding and looked into this a little bit more than I have. Maybe he can speak on it, because I hate just blaming it on the masculine. Because I feel like we've been doing that a lot. And I agree with what you're saying, that there's an attack on the divine feminine, but there's also, it's really almost like the understanding of both has been totally just eradicated at this point. And maybe historically, Silas might have something to add to that kind of supports that what I was just saying, because I know people never believed that there was an actual matriarchal society at one point. It just doesn't. They don't seem to get it.
It's very interesting. Like, we are discovering ancient tombs of women that were shaman, that are buried with shamanic instruments and adorned. And often these women were deformed. They had disabilities. And so in the ancient cultures, people that were born with disabilities were often thought to be sacred, because because of their disabilities, they had developed other abilities to compensate for their physical disabilities. And so they were more in tune with the astral. Because they couldn't walk around so easily, they had a walking inhibition. They learned to sit down and travel out of their consciousness, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's common.
So I think like there's evidence coming to light now that shamanism has its roots in the divine feminine.
Yes. Yeah, I think as well, this idea. See, you see, for example, I was reading The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and I have this very beautiful copy, and it's got all of the various plates in it, all of the various images, and I mean, yeah, they're very nice. But there's one, I think it's page 30 or so, where it has Isis, and she is the mother goddess who is veiled. And I think it's meant to be a sort of scarlet veil. And interestingly, right at the bottom, it has the fruit which I have brought forth is the quote sun. And then at the top it says, with the winged disc above that, I, Isis, am all that has been, that is, or shall be. No mortal man hath ever me unveiled. So basically this idea is the mother of matter, right? So the mare as well. The mare, which is the sea.
Prima materia.
The prima materia, absolutely. So it's this. Really, when we talk about the divine feminine, it is a larger allegory, at least in Western esotericism. But there is absolutely there was some sort of matriarchal tendency within the sort of folk religions, pre-Abrahamic really, or the pre-Abrahamization of the world. And you even see that, for example, in the Old Testament, where they chop down all the Asherah poles. They chop down all of the cosmic pillar to the axis mundi, if you will. And we see that with the world as well, because if you, again, you take those intersection points and extrapolate them out from the 4 royal stars, Leo or Regulus being one, Aquarius, Antares with Scorpio, and Taurus with Aldebaran being the others, you intersect at the point of the divine feminine in the center, in her womb, because the world itself is the womb of learning. It is the Platonic cave. In this darkness are we born. And of course, the birth canal from the waters of life are we born. But the waters of life, like the sea, the deep abyss, the mare, is salty. So it's corrosive as well as being comforting. So you have this paradox which creates or fashions alchemically the soul, and then that the soul leads to the feeding of the spirit. So this idea of, no mortal man hath ever me unveiled. It's this notion that, well, eventually, through the Faustian means, through mathematics and these sort of mechanistic concepts, which Steiner spoke of as well, that perhaps Ahriman or the Demiurge has a hand in teaching us these mechanistic concepts, because what you're doing is you're only seeing the tree from one perspective. It's a true perspective, but it's not the holistic perspective of every angle of that tree. And what you're speaking of is the more intuitive aspect of spirituality, which really is. I mean, it's the basis of spirituality. You've got to develop that intuition. It's very Kabbalistic. You're quite right. No mortal man hath ever me unveiled. What they seek is to unveil the divine feminine. This is why, by the way, you have all of these mother goddesses called virgins, right? They're not virgins because they've been squeaky clean. It's an allegory that's of a spiritual truth that no man has, well, no mortal man hath ever unveiled. So it's this Kabbalistic concept that you need to see things. You need to make them tactile or tangible. This is why they're attempting to control nature through these technologies. This is why they're attempting to, for example, in CERN, make the invisible visible, to make the metaphysical purely material. So it is very much, you actually brought up a superb point. You go from the Keter to Malkuth, and then, of course, the Vedic or Dharmic traditions, you go from the other way around. So you actually go from, if you will, the moon to Saturn, as opposed to from Saturn to the moon. So it's interesting because, of course, the moon is associated with the feminine. It's also associated with Lepus, the white rabbit, and all of that, enlightenment through that symbolism. So the Vedic or Dharmic religions or traditions, they venerate the moon, the feminine, as the gateway to the exit. And of course, Kabbalah, Western esotericism, which is based off that's a Near Eastern Kabbalistic tradition, has it the other way around. So they're attempting to establish on earth what exists in heaven through that descent. It's a very it's similar, pardon, but it's almost totally inverted at the same time, in that sense.
And this is where
Wow.
we have an issue, right? Because this is like, I think, why a lot of us are drawn to like Steiner or even Carl Jung can be kind of in this category of they were trying to synthesize the two,
whether it be these two different styles of occultism or the materialism and scientism that we're all wrapped up in now. Like, he wanted to take the middle path, because which is the correct way to go about doing this? Obviously, when you get to one extreme or the other, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. When we speak about this middle path, I've actually got a whole a whole weave that is really tying into what you were just saying, Silas, and what you're just adding in there with the middle path. I'll try and keep it as concise as possible. It might help if I bring a picture to help keep the concentration working in a better flow. But fundamentally, this is really what I'm looking at here. So I hope you guys can see this picture. Yeah, it should be on the screen. Let me know if it is.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So for some reason I can't seem to see it. There we go. So fundamentally here, like here I've got the seven principles. These are the 7 Hermetic principles. And I think this illustrates quite well the idea. So if we take it in terms of like the divine feminine and the masculine, and this is relating completely to the astral and the etheric and the ascension and the descension of the difference of parts. I always consider the chakras to represent the astral path, the astral way. And I always understand the sephirot to represent the etheric way. Now, the etheric and the astral are related in Vedic cosmology to the Ida and the Pingala. The astral being related to the Ida, and the Pingala being related to basically the astral. So, Pingala related to the etheric and Ida related to the astral. So the Ida is basically to do with the hypothalamus, which is attached to the pituitary gland, which is our moods, our emotions, our feelings, and how this infrastructure is really wired into our smell fundamentally. And then we've got the rational, which is the pituitary gland, which is wired into the thalamus, and how this regulates our thinking and our logos, our logic, our ability to draw distinctions, the rational intellect, if we will. And this operates through the central nervous system, controlling the resonant frequencies of the nerves and the bit rate of electrical impulses that carry the information through the cables and the synapses, where the Ida, or the emotional current, is really working through the pituitary gland, and the hormonal system is really what this is plugged into. Now, the endocannabinoid system acts as a buffering system between the hormonal system and the rational central nervous system. And so this endocannabinoid system is so like really fundamental to the formation of new experiences, memories, ideas, inherent creative thinking, which is really fundamental to combination of both the Ida and the Pingala, where if you look at those pictures of the chakras, you'll see someone sitting down and you'll see the blue snake on the right hand side of the image, and the red snake on the left hand side of the image, and the red rising snake represents the Pingala, and the left falling snake represents the Ida. Now we've got the same notion here when we think of Boaz and Joachim in the Kabbalah. We've got the 2 pillars, and these 2 pillars represent fundamental and important polarities, right? If we consider this is a reflection of the same idea of the Ida and the Pingala, right? Where Boaz is the unity resulting from love, right? And the unity resulting from love is really chesed, which is mercy. And Yachin is the unity from being, which is really the manifestation of the will. So we've got these 2 polarities being expressed here, and the will operates in the etheric field, and the love operates in the astral field. So the astral field is essentially the emotions, essentially the hormonal system, and the etheric field is essentially the intellectual, rational, the engine of the will, if we will. So these 7 principles now, the 7 principles of Hermes, and I've got them sort of arranged to show the causal, the astral, and the etheric spheres, and where the crossover points are within the 7 principles, the 7 chakras, which also relate to the 7 fundamental principles of Hermes. So we've got the principle of mentalism, which is essentially the inspiration, the Sasra chakra in our consciousness. Then we've got intuition, which is the what we call the Ashna or the Ankhya, which is the 3rd eye chakra, which represents the correspondences between all things, that all things are connected to other things in a secret network, and the one that is able to intuit these sacred connections between things. Then we have the memory, which represents the field of vibration, the mem of the Kabbalah. And this field of vibration is obviously related to the Visuddhi chakra, which is the Akasha, which is the soul of the world, the memory of the world, the root of the causal body. You see the top blue sphere is the causal body. Its root is in memory. And then we've got the astral body. Its highest aspiration is the memory. For through the memory, it is able to reconnect with the Akasha and intuit all of the information of the Akashic field, which can then become an inspiration to drive via the imagination, the will. And so the imagination then becomes an extension of the Anahata chakra, or the principle of polarity. For that ability to polarize is how the energy comes into being from the extension of vibration. So this energy then is what drives the rhythm of the universe, because the energy is the movement of the vibration, and that movement has a rhythm, and that rhythm is thus driving us forwards, which is thus the extension of the will. The will then is an interesting perspective, because it then becomes the root of the astral, but it becomes the highest aspiration of the etheric. And the highest aspiration of the etheric is this will moving forwards. Now we see this is very interesting, because we've got the will and we've got memory as being the 2 nodes of interaction between the etheric and the astral, and the etheric and the astral and the causal. And the causal is that aspect of the body which is going to transcend death and is going to basically be reborn in different egos in order. This is the ego. So this moves through space and time to get a root of an ego. And that ego then has to form a persona. And then the persona then has to project within it a body. So the body is small. The persona is small, but the persona lives within an ego. The ego lives within a causal body, within a causal field. This is like what we can call the Manu, or the Adam Kadmon of the Kabbalah. That's what's linking us in the archetypal unifying consciousness of the shared consciousness from Jungian study. And here is essentially the astral field, which is really the imagination. Now, if you've traveled into the astral as opposed to the etheric, the first thing you notice is that there's liquid around you. It's like a fluid-based substance, and there is no form. There is no up, there is no down, there is no right. There are no proverbial rules. The imagination is the rule of the astral, and whatever you imagine is what becomes the substance around you. The water is like pliable to the imagination, and that like is driven by memory and the will. But when we're in the etheric, it's driven by instinct, right? Yeah. And it's all about the sensation moving towards will. So this is really the structure of the universe. So the containers of the Sephirot are what contains the energy. And the energy is the chakras, which is the spiraling motion that consciousness has to go in order to take form. And then that actual consciousness, which is both spiraling and fundamentally creating form. So we could think of the causal as being the Shashumna in that diagram, which is the middle pillar, which is the fundamental spiritual body, as opposed to the fundamental astral body, as opposed to the fundamental etheric body. And I have a huge issue with a lot of these Kabbalistic texts that, in my opinion, misinterpret the astral and misinterpret the etheric. They speak about the emotional field, and they speak about the etheric as if it's the astral field. But in Vedic cosmology, the emotional field is the astral field, and the mental field is the etheric field. And so we have been taught to move upwards from our etheric, and the will becomes the instrument of direction that we move along, which is the solar presence. The solar presence is that fundamental expression, that will. But the lunar presence is coming from the point of memory. It's more of a revealer of that which is hidden within the lunar current. So when we're moving downwards from the causal body, we are moving through the instrument of memory to become form. But when we're moving from the physical form, we use the will to reanimate the memory. And so we have this very interesting juxtaposition, and they seem to be inverted, where we move down towards the sphere of the lunar from the material, spiritual, to the material in the Kabbalistic tree. But in the Vedic cosmology, we move up from the solar up to the lunar, which is really the Shastra emanations of Shiva, which is the currents of the lunar symbolisms of Nandi, the bull, and the lunar goddess impressions as being an expression of this highest spiritual potential, which is really the memory of the universe. So these two polarities are rather fundamental. And so we look at like the nature of creation, and we see so that the mental field is the first principle of Hermes, which is that there can be nothing divided and there can be nothing added to it. That the mental sphere is perfect and complete in itself. It is the Padma. It is the 1,000-petaled lotus. Every possibility is within that one lotus, and it is completely embodied. But this then needs to become polarized. So this is a unified state. This then needs to polarize for the intuition to come into being, which thus has to have correspondences. And in the process of this polarization of the correspondences, we have the vibrations. And the vibrations are the way in which this intuition, or the second principle of Hermes, is actually manifesting the principle of polarity. So we have the polarity in the center of this field, and we have the inspiration and the memory being unifying principles, which is interesting to look at when we apply this back to the etheric and the astral. And then we have, once again, from that unified vibration, because vibration is a unified thing that is occurring in order for that which cannot be divided, that which cannot be added to, for something to be divided from it and something to be added. But in the process of dividing and adding, it cannot be taken from it. So we have to have that principle of quantum entanglement, which means that something exists in more than one place at once. Because if you have 5 stones in your left hand and you need to have a stone in your right hand without dividing from that stone in your left hand, one of those stones have to occupy 2 points, right? So quantum entanglement is born as the reflection of the second principle of Hermes due to the vibration, which is an embodiment of this process of the mental sphere of mentalism being taken into extension of movement. Now the movement has to then be quantified. And so there's a polarity in order to quantify this movement, which we call energy, which is polarity. All energy needs polarity. There has to be poles for energy to come into being. But now, once again, the same process is being worked on the astral field. This has to now be turned into a singularity of polarity, which becomes the resonant frequencies of rhythm, which is the way in which vibration is put into context. Because rhythm and vibration are really one thing, but separated into 2 contexts. And then rhythm now needs to be divided again. The rhythm, which is the will, needs to be divided into cause and effect. So the rhythm principle, the 5th principle of Hermes, then separates into another polarity, which is cause and effect, in order to reflect that imagination, which is duality of polarity, which reflects the duality of correspondence. For correspondence implies 2 things have to correspond, and imagination polarity has to be in relation to that, with a singularity between the 2 and a singularity between the polarity of the 4th principle of Hermes and the cause and effect of the 6th principle of Hermes, bound by the rhythm. So the rhythm and the vibration become the 2 fundamental keys. Now we're talking the sun and the moon. And then we see once again this polarity, or this, probably a better way to put it, is this active dual process of
Well, it's-
polarity.
One way I put it is a sort of double arcing of mutually complementary yet also mutually paradoxical forces. Yeah.
Beautifully put, brother. Beautifully put. Wonderfully articulated. So these then have to come together in sensation. And sensation relates to the senses, the physical senses, which is really what's putting it all together into what we call the seventh principle of Hermes, which is that blending together of the masculine and feminine impulse, which is blending of the astral and the etheric. So in our physical bodies, we have the four directions, which relates to bringing all three of these aspects into a single alignment of the fourth direction, which is basically squaring the process. So we're now squaring the circle effectively. And now we have the Malkuth, now we have the Asiya of the Kabbalah.
Yeah.
Here we have the etheric field, which we could call Yetzirah in the Kabbalah, which we call the etheric field in Vedic cosmos. And then we have the astral field, which we would call the Bria. Now, Bria relates to the emotions. Yetzirah relates to the rational ability to conceptualize. And then we have the Atzilut, which is that fundamental sphere of pure intuition, pure inspiration, which is the unified field of consciousness reflecting the first principle of Hermes. And so we have a trinity. We have the first trinity being formed here, right? The first triad of the Sunos. And here we have what they call the astral, what they call the lower triangle very often the astral triangle in Kabbalistic law, which troubles me. I consider the Bria to be the astral triangle. And this astral triangle relates to Jabura, Chesed, and Tifaret as being the imagination at the center of this triangle.
See,
Sorry?
My idea is that Kabbalah and the Near Eastern mysticism that really, gave birth to Western esotericism and such, and Masonry and all of this, that what we're seeing there is actually a sort of, it's probably, I believe, just from what I've studied historically in that, from the archaeological evidence, for example, in the Harappan civilization and such, that perhaps they stemmed as an offshoot of the Vedic traditions. And then of course, we were mentioning this inversion in Zoroastrianism between the Ahuras and the Devas. So they may have migrated westward, this sort of, what do you call it, a heretic sect or whatever. And this with these inverted ideas, and the further west they went, the more sort of, patriarchal in the sort of systemic sense, the more patriarchal they became. You see it within, for example, the hexagram and all of the various hexagrammatic sigils, such as Thelema. Another one would be, of course, Masonry. I mean, there's literally hundreds of them. But it's this notion, like what you're saying, that the womb, the feminine, always is always under that of the point of the phallus of the male. And even the way that they view the phallic symbol, it's almost like that of a germinating tree when they speak about it in Kabbalistic and Masonic lore. It's a germinating tree that is not yet fully fledged. It's almost this idea that you see with the Eye of Providence, that the capstone isn't quite finished yet, but annuit coeptus, he's propitious, the auspicious one has looked favorably upon us. I think that even this idea you see in annuit coeptus of, he has looked favorably upon our undertaking. I think Shiva is actually called the propitious one, or the one who looks favorably upon people, the auspicious one as well. So I think that they've had a very inverted idea of perhaps the destructive impulse or the destructive compulsion of the universe, of that principle. And you even see it when they go into Egypt with the Hyksos, where they take Set, which Set is almost like a sort of pre-Hyksos, is a necessary evil. It's a sort of necessary destroyer, but it's a destroyer like Shiva, which is it's creative destruction. It's the ending of old things and the beginning of new things. But they take that and they turn it into this sort of a donkey-headed deity, where it's all about darkness. I mean, you couldn't make this up. It's so cartoonish. It's all about darkness, destruction. We have to harness destruction. Is almost the principle guiding the technological advancements of humanity. And we have to break everything down.
You could see this almost, and this is, I mean, people probably will find this a little bit extreme, but I think Plato even brings this up in his writings, but I know Steiner does, and it's some of the earliest things that we did basically that took us away from the divine. And it's basically from writing to farming. I mean, I was going to say in agriculture, you could see this destructive principle of like wiping out like a whole plot of land so it's then fertile for the harvest or for the next harvest. I mean, and that's what they've applied then to everything that they do. Whereas instead of understanding where this might work here, it's not how you should apply it there, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. There was something I was going to mention on those 7 chakras as well. Is it okay if you can bring up that image again? It was I totally agree with everything you were saying. It was very well put. This actually links to it links with pretty much every mythology, but to the Norse mythology, you see that in the beginning, Ymir, which probably comes from the Old Norse verb imja, which means to literally to make a noise. Actually, it means to scream, which is interesting when you understand Gununga Gap. I think it's the void-filled chasm, or the chasmic void. That sort of idea from its translation.
That's really interesting that you just said that. There was a huge weave that me and Gabe and I think it was just, I don't know if it was just me and Gabe or me, Gabe and PK had last week on a Banshee kept coming up for some reason, and the symbolism we were looking at. And I mean, that's like what a Banshee does is scream.
Yes. It's similar. You see this within a lot of I don't know if it's in its origin, if it's from Kabbalah or if it's from the more Dharmic traditions, but you see that quite a lot, that the feminine is associated with the Logos. I don't know about the Vedic tradition. That escapes me.
I think the Banshee was like a reference when we had found it to a feminine ghost entity somewhere, maybe out of Ireland or something like that. Yes. Like the mythology around this like witch or ghost that was
associated with Morrigan. I looked at it as well. It's associated with the Harley Quinn and the Wild Hunt and those ideas. It's Harley Quinn is obviously from the Heliquin of the Old English, which is I think it literally means leader of hell or something along those lines. But that's it's extremely interesting, that idea. But if you look at Ymir, so he's sort of screaming out into the void, that idea from the etymology. Obviously, he's murdered by the Tria Prima, the 3 primes that, of course, in that Isis plate, I think it's plate 8 on page 30 of Secret Teachings of All Ages, at the top of her head, she has the 3, this sort of plume headdress, and there's 3 plumes, of course, relating to this. But Vili, Ve, literally temple, or associating with memory. And then you have Votan, which may derive from the Lord of the Frenzy, the imagination, right? This frenzy of thoughts that comes to you as you imagine, that which creates the sort of ripple effect throughout the field of force, if you will. So you have those 3 contained in the center, right there. Memory, or Ve, the temple. Imagination, Votan, the frenzy. And then, of course, Vili, which is will. So the 3 of those murder Ymir. They betray him. Again, like Adam and Eve betrayed God. by eating from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they almost through this betrayal, they done away with the icy, inert principle that was in the beginning, the pure potential, undifferentiated and unmanifested, the singularity. And it's like what you were stating, that, you know, humans have a tendency, a bit like the Lichtenberg pattern, we make problems for ourselves, right? We start off with one thing, then we must divide it, and then we must divide it again, and then so on and so forth. It's similar to the Pythagorean Y principle. So in this sense, you see it within the Adam and the Garden of Eden story, where you have the tree of life, which is the one, then you have the tree of basically duality, the knowledge of good and evil, which the knowledge is false, right? Because you can never, as a mortal man, like what it's stated in that Isis print, no mortal man hath unveiled me, because no mortal man can still maintain his mortality if he finds that singularity point between the double arcane principles, if he finds sort of the origin point of the vortex, the toroid, the storm of the world. So it's that principle, you see it with it's the Y principle is absolutely everywhere. Of course, it's written into the fabric of creation and nature itself. But do you find, I find it funny as well, because you have Aleister Crowley, and Crowley stated that love under will. Yes, love under will. But there's a very, and this probably stems from a lot of the philosophers in the late 19th century, even the early 19th century as well, that had this very Kabbalistic outlook, perhaps even a decadent or a debauched outlook of love. And it's carried today through into our modern world. You know, love is love and all of this. But love essentially in the modern day is just a synonym for unbridled lust, largely. Or the, like what you see there, the sensations, the lower roots. So this idea that Crowley put forward of love under will really shows that, like what you're saying, the etheric is completely in their mind. That's all they see. It's all they view. They don't see anything above that. They want everyone trapped in this golden dome, if you will. You know, that they can't ever climb higher, that the hanged man can never find the cord and pull himself up from the abyss and reach heaven, reach those higher realms. Basically, it's the perfection through biodigitalism of a soul trap. And it all stems from that, like what you're saying, Chris, the agricultural revolution, which didn't just scar the planet, it scarred our very psyche. And you have this, what I called in my first book, agrarian systematization, where, like a farmer views crops, he doesn't view the crops individually. He views the crops as a mass. And this is how the rulers of this planet, the sort of dark ones, this is how they view humanity. They don't see the intrinsic worth of human beings individually. They see the sort of intrinsic worth of a batch of the crop. They view very much the civilizations as fields to be sown, tilled, sown, and harvested. Again, similar to wiping the reset clean and then beginning again. And then, of course, they'll leave the field fallow after they have harvested it, so that it may replenish its nutrients and such. And then they will go back to exploit it again. I mean, ultimately, it does stem from that Kabbalistic sort of distinction from the Vedic world. I mean, I trace them back to Pashupati. I think that's what they were worshipping. And you see it with the four, so the World Tarot card, even Isis as well, in that play 8, she has 4 murals of deities. I forget them now. Thoth is one of them. But it's the same thing. You take the intersection, you extrapolate the intersection points of those. It creates the sort of saltire or the cross, the tav, and it puts it directly at her womb. You see the same thing with Ezekiel's vision of Yahweh. It's everywhere, and what this is ultimately getting back to is the toroid, the minimal orbital atomic structure to establish the toroidal moment is 4 atoms that are sort of placed in an hourglass pattern, facing inwards into one singular 5th element, which sort of acts as the apex, the capstone that combines all the other, all 4. This is also how you escape, right? Like what you were saying, you have to square the elements, if you will, right? You have to square that thing. You see it in masonry. You have to take the square and you have to hewn the stone. The stone must be hewn.
Hey, Silas, can you find a picture of that, the ISIS plate that we could pull up?
Yeah.
And I was gonna say a better example of than the field that I actually might be even totally in sync, at least more in sync with what we were talking about, is just building in general, like building structures to live in. Like this is like the basis of like the very first things that man is said to have done, build a place to live. So that takes you looking at the surrounding, the earth, the ground, and then you're basically breaking up everything into pieces. It's like the first materialists, the first atomists were the builders, and these are the master builders. This is what they do. They break things into pieces, and then they try to create something new. And that's what they've always done. They don't know any other way.
Yeah, absolutely. And also as well, it's almost like an artificial womb itself. That again, it's like the cave. So man will always go back to the cave because it is the womb from whence he came. So, and of course, he wants to be in the cave, under the cover of darkness and away from the light of the sun. He can perhaps be closer to that, like what you were saying, with the sort of the singularity, the primordial abyss, right? That from which everything stemmed from. So yeah.
Well, and this almost seems like where there might be even like a split in how they view the public versus how they view themselves, as to where like they see the public and the normal people as those who belong in the cave, whereas they see themselves as those who belong outside the cave, who can basically destroy the mother, which is the prima materia, and make a new world for themselves, because they are actually the ones who deserve to be like the creators, whereas the rest of the world is not. They belong back in the womb.
Oh yeah. Well, they, even from the writings, and you see this in the Zohar, and of course it's found in even Morals and Dogma, where they actually see themselves as a different species. They think we're cut from a totally different, I guess, clay to them, and that they are in power because they are of a different sort of fire, a different sort of quality. And well, you see it with the Tower of Babel, right? They will always be on the top. This is how hierarchies function. So they will be at the top. They will see the light of the sun. They will grow ever closer to, heaven. So that which is in heaven will now, due to that vav, that spine, if you will, that serpent or branch, the phallic symbol, they will be able to pierce, to unveil Isis, to pierce the veil of Isis, to pierce the veil that no man hath ever unveiled. So if you can't unveil it, you might as well just, perforate it with the obelisk. It's this notion with the tower. But everyone underneath that and all of these various compartments of the levels of that tower, they're like what you're saying, they're all in darkness, total darkness. They're in ignorance. It's all an allegory. They're in ignorance. The only people that see the light is those who are, at the top rungs of the tower, busily building it up to heaven.
And then obviously, if no mortal man can unveil Isis, then they need to become immortal. And if that destroys the tower, which it usually always does, everyone else is just collateral damage.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this is, I don't know if you were here, it was previous, where we were discussing, the Garden of Eden is sort of an allegory, where when you get away from nature, when you want to use technology to not just harness the power of nature, but to curtail and control nature, like a charioteer reining in nature, then you take the fool's journey. It's only going to end one way. And it's circular, that the foolhardy hero will always turn into the heroic fool, and vice versa. So there's no getting away from it. But of course, they're so blinded that they don't see the sort of blind spot around the corner. They can't imagine it. They're so, sort of high on their own farts.
You have this weird group of some are more psychedelic in their views, like Terrence McKenna was, where he thinks that we can be like, through the use of like a combination of psychedelics and then transhumanism, somehow we can all be separated in our need to destroy and take from the earth, so that like mutual sort of relationship can be, I guess, totally unbalanced and just given back to nature, and we become like this dead, unhuman, I guess, artificial entity. And like, there's a whole talk where Terrence McKenna, before he died, he discussed like how we would be in basically avatars, and we'd be seeing around us, but really either our consciousness would be attached to the avatars and our body would be somewhere else where it wouldn't need to destroy, or we just somehow, I don't know how the hell these people think that they're going to disentangle our consciousness from the source of where our consciousness is coming from our bodies, and then put it into some artificial container, because it seems like a lot of them think that's possible too, which I don't think it is.
Wow, that's like, you guys have hit on so many points. I want to get back to Terrence McKenna, because I've been talking about that in depth on Gabe's group last night. But first, what you were talking about, you mentioned Pashupati. Yeah?
Silas said, yeah.
10 minutes ago, Silas.
Yeah.
And that's obviously like Kathmandu, right? Pashupatinath.
Yes, the temple there, yeah.
A very special connection with that place. Now, Pashupati is very interesting because, Pashu means gross to a certain extent. It means animalistic, I think, like natural animalistic instinct. And Pati is obviously father. With the Greek and the Hebrew comes Patri and all of these other, and patriarch. The same way that Mata is Sanskrit for mother. So you got Pashupati, and then Nath means controller, lord, chief. So you got like the lord, chief, masculine, fatherly, animalistic spirit. And when we look at the oldest worship of Shiva, okay, so prior to Shiva there was Deus Pitar. Deus Pitar was being worshipped first, and Deus Pitar is what became Zeus, and Jupiter are other extensions of this name, which was Sky Father. And we're back to Pashupati, right? Yeah. Sky Father, the animalistic, the pan, the pan being nature, right? And so we're thinking of like the consciousness as being reflected through nature. So panpsychism is what we're talking about in its most fundamental form. And this panpsychic expression of the Father through the sky, which is really having domain over us, which represents Pashupatinath in another way. And I think it's like really important.
If you want, I'm sharing an image on my share screen, and you could keep going just so people have an image of what the seal of Pashupati looks like.
I just wanted to say really quickly, so sorry to interrupt your train of thought, but you've pointed something out that's quite profound, because when you actually look at, well, firstly, beginning in the sort of Western Levant, but all over, of course, the distinction was always made with Odin and Donar, and you would even have, I think in the Lithuanian pantheon, you have Dievas and Perun. So you have this distinction that's made. You don't have it with, for example, you have this distinction between the Sky Father and the more malefic aspect. You don't have that in the Semitic. I believe in the Afro-Asiatic, so ancient Egypt does not have that either, nor did the Hittites and that sort of Indo-Aryan or Indo-European culture there. The Mitanni, all of that, all of those cultures, the Hurrians, none of them had that distinction. So the Sky Father was the storm and war deity. So they only worshipped, like what you're saying, this sort of malefic aspect, the destructive aspect. Perhaps it had something to do with, I mean, the place was very warlike. It's all the empires of history really descend from this spot, the idea, the agricultural revolution, according to history at least. So perhaps, you know, there was so much at stake, they didn't look at the more benevolent aspect of the Sky Father. They merely took the storm and war aspect, you know, the sort of violence of the sky, if you will, the energetic principle of the sky. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, you didn't at all. And that's interesting. Like you look at Brahma. So Brahma is like, we don't have much about Brahma in modern times. Brahma was in ancient times. Now, Brahma, I believe, was an extension of this Deus Pitar, who was first worshipped. Maybe Deus Pitar represented a avatar of Brahma, which is an interesting concept during the Golden Age. And Brahma, if you look at him, so basically, he was getting it on with Saraswati. She's his daughter. We've got to look at this idea. So I think in the Semitic tradition, it was excused, wasn't it? Like Abraham basically strapped his son to a rock. He was going to like cut out the heart of his son, because that was just what we do, right? He's my eldest son. I've tied him to a rock. I cut his heart out. I burn his heart on coals, and this is how I praise my God.
It's almost like the Hierophant, isn't it? It's just empty ritualism. You're not thinking about it, yeah.
Well, this is where we can get
embodiment of
some of the
prison
entities that might be working on us, some of the energies, at least, that might be working on people from outside of the realm that seem to demand this sort of worship and sacrifice.
Now we're getting onto something, because like the whole idea of the eighth sphere, right? So from my looking into the eighth sphere, and we even get it in the New Age mumbo jumbo, which is trying to embody these concepts, where they talk about, they've gotten clever with it, the lower astral, the upper astral, because they don't know the difference between the etheric. But now if we look at the etheric is where these beings were imprisoned. So if we go back to the story of Shemyaza used the Fika oath, and the Fika oath was basically given to Shemyaza by the higher deity angelic beings in order that they could fulfill this right and destiny in this war against the giants.
Yeah.
So and so we see this story of this, I believe, represents the tetragrammaton, the Fika oath. And this Fika oath is related to a tablet. And I think we're talking about the tablets of destiny. I think the tablets that the same tablets that from the Sumerian was brought here by Alelu, Yeah, he came here with tablets. He used the tablets to communicate with Nibiru when he arrived. So these tablets were stolen by someone later on, and whoever
Anzu.
held these tablets held power.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say Anzu. I think that's the name of the thief. Literally, I think it's the heavenly owl. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well,
Carry on, brother. Yeah.
You know what's interesting about this Panchu Patty figure? I've heard Silas, I've heard you talk about him a lot recently, and I'd seen the seal before, but looking at it, you have the three faces, almost like what's a jabulon, and you have the two arms, which seem to be almost like the two serpents that are held up, almost like this, and I think it's kind of more demiurgic like symbolism. It seems like this is like a demiurge.
Well, I mean, my interpretation of it is, I didn't mean to interrupt you, BushWhisperer, if you want to finish your point.
No. Well, I think I've pretty much gotten to the point that this Fikr oath was a reflection of sound. To understand the difference between the etheric and the astral is to understand sound. So sound has shape. It's cymatics. So sound has both quality and it has shape. And so when we consider a sound, we consider the tone of the sound, which makes us have an emotional field. And we consider the cymatic value of the sound, which gives it a shape and a form. So here's an interesting point. You guys might appreciate this. So our hormones are vibrating at between 1.3 gigahertz and 4.7 gigahertz.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Those are our hormones, the resonant frequencies of the hormones. Is it a coincidence that our phones, our laptops, and our modems...
Yes. It's interesting because they talk about that almost like, for example, in Homer's Odyssey, where they, for example, when they go to that island with I think it's the sirens, and of course they entice them, and there's the feminine again with this notion of the logos, the screaming, or the banshee, and but in this sense it's sort of enticing. And they're brought in there and they eat these lotuses, and they lose basically they become mindless. They lose a sense of time. And it's the same thing that you're seeing within the culture now as well. I've heard a lot of people say, where does the time go, right? And it's even more pronounced than what I've seen in the past. Of course, you have older people go, where's the time going? I'm at that stage as well. I'm getting to that stage too. Oh wow, it just felt like it was Christmas just yesterday. Pardon. So, yeah, but it's even more pronounced now, and I think it has something to do with like what you're saying. It's that it's like the refresh rate of reality within this digital sphere. It's creating this sort of mindless vacuum for our minds to exist within, where we lose all sense of, we lose our anchor, if you will, which is the spirit. I think that's the plan, isn't it?
Yeah. And I just popped up a card that actually was that Gabe's been talking about nonstop on his channel, Slick Dissident, giving him a shout out. But this card from the Crowley Tarot deck, I mean, this is Panchu Patti. Like, it is both the same, they're the same thing. Yeah. Like, it's all there, all the symbolism is there.
Oh yeah, it's the same idea. I mean, even with Pashu Patti, you have the three, and even the idea of the trumps, right? The trumps, but you've obviously got the Donald, he who is the golden dawn of the sort of trump card, and with Pashu Patti, you have the three, almost like Hecate. You have the three various faces. So again, the thresholds of time Another thing to mention, by the way, now that Ukraine is on the sort of radar of everyone again, the blue and the yellow create the green. This is the reason money is green. It's the reason that we live in the middle of the light spectrum, the Midgard, the Middle Earth, where everything is green. Well, usually it's green anyway. And again, that is in one sense, it is the colour of spiritual unripeness. It is the colour, of course, of decomposition and death as well. Things will go gangrenous when they die, when they necrotize. So blue and yellow is that green. And then what else do we see with the symbol of, or the coat of arms, the sigil of Kiev? It is, I believe in Ukrainian, it's called the tribuz, which literally is the trident. And then I was talking on the last stream, the Shem, the name which, according to 2 Kings 21:7, is etched into Jerusalem, which is the sort of W-like letter of the Shin, which is the 21st letter, which is the world tarot card corresponding with that, which is the 21st tarot card. And then, of course, we look at Pashupati. Again, those four animals are very similar, you could say, to that of the World Tarot card with the four royal stars. And interestingly as well, going from one direction to the other, one axis to the other, I think it's from the rhino to the one that's on the bottom right, I forget now, you'll have a man and a man. So it's almost like that is the journey, if you will. It's probably similar to this notion of the Masonic, well, it's a Masonic greeting, where it goes, I'm a man, I think it is, yeah, I'm a stranger traveling from the east. And then the other individual would go, you know, what do you see? I am who you seek. I come from the west. So it's this idea of the descent, the spiritual involution leading to conscious evolution, from Saturn to Cancer, from Cancer to Saturn, or from, again, the point of oblivion, where we drink from the river, of forgetfulness. We descend spiritually into captivity with the sort of the gestation of mother nature, and then we're meant to learn from this place of spiritual unripeness. We're meant to, again, the branches of heaven can't reach heaven unless their roots descend into hell. It's that notion. So all of this is really tied up with that. And of course, the headdress of Pashupati is that W shape. And then we have JFK. He was assassinated on Dealey Plaza, which is the shape of a psi letter, which is the Greek equivalent of the Shin, or the W letter. It's everywhere, and it's with Ukraine as well. So ultimately, what you're seeing there is a sort of, I mean, it's, to me, it's very plain symbolism of this, again, like what we see throughout these various demiurgic deities, planned sacrifice of some description. Again, a Negredo reaching a Rubeda, and everything in between the Albedo and the Trinitas. So it's pretty much there. I mean, to me, it appears that the semiotics overlap. I think whatever you could call it, the Asura cult or this mercantilist cult that left or were ousted from ancient India, the Harappan or Indus Valley civilization, and went westward. Perhaps they were ousted because they had that totally inverted aspect, or inverted notion rather, of this Shiva principle. Perhaps there was something to do with that. Who knows? But that's my speculation.
You know what's interesting too about that, the sort of horn or three, whatever you want to say. It looks like I know it's like supposed to be like bull's horns or something at the top of Panchupati. It's really inverted, and at the bottom of John Dee's Monad Hieroglyphica, that the symbol that he has, it looks like a hangman almost, and at the bottom is the ignis, which I think means fire in Latin.
Yes. It's and of course as well with the Yod He Vav He, like what you were talking about with Shamyaza. And Shamyaza from the Hebrew is a compound, and its etymology literally means he who stares at the heavens. So it's this idea that he's fallen from heaven and he wants to reach back to heaven by any means necessary. So it's the same thing. The Yod is the fire. That is the thing which is in the Tetragrammaton, which is at the top of everything. And of course, you can take the Yod He Vav He and its sort of Hebraic lettering form. You stack them on top of each other vertically, and it creates man. It creates an outline of man. So what they're worshipping is the fire, because ultimately, and this is the grandest mystery of all in Masonry, right? But essentially, we are the demiurge. We are Yahweh. We are the Tetragrammaton. I know it's totally controversial to say, but when you look into the Zohar, the 4 elements, you just have to stack the Hebrew letters on top of one another. Clearly, the Yahweh is the fullness of man. Like the 4 elements are the fullness of our lower body, or what you were stating, our sort of etheric, everything under the will. So they worship the igneous principle. That's what they worship, as opposed to, say, the more mercurial aspect. And it's that idea you see in alchemy, where it states est in mercurio solis quod querunt sapientes, or what the wise seek is to be found within the sun of Mercury, or Mercury's sun, like what Isis states in that plate 8. Right, I have brought forth the fruit of the sun. What the sun is both in its sort of a day aspect, the aspect that we see it in the day, and in its sort of underworld or chthonic aspect with the moon, is that it is the principle of dualism which hangs above us. It's the pendulum, which, if we understand its rhythm, the Mercury, the transformative rhythm of it, then we can pierce the middle. We can understand the knowledge, the temperance, which is between the 2 extremes. I mean, that's ultimately what it's pointing to. But they take a different principle. It's all about fire. It's about the Promethean technology. They try to externalize their spirit through technology. And you see the same thing with digitalism. Of course, Yuval Noah Harari talks about we need the Homo Deus, the biodigital convergence of the God-men. Sorry, please.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please continue. I'm just getting excited.
Well, we should,
Please.
should, I think, maybe now like try to get into, like, because I know we had this in the title, even, like living in a world of astral abduction, basically. And I know we were continuing on from last week, and this all started with just a question I had brought up to Franklin: who are the gray men? And basically, who are these entities that have been influencing us for what seems like our entire human history, and keep continuing to push into this sort of bio-digital construct, which ultimately seems just like a prison for our souls.
I think that's like really that's really where we're going to end up going. I just wanted to comment on some of the things that you were saying, Silas, and I think it is actually going to tie back into these entities, because we can see above his head, if you look carefully, those are ram horns upside down, inverted ram horns.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
So he's carrying the ram horns on his head. Now the ram horns from my diagram, represents instinct, represents that fundamental cause and effect. It's got to do with the fundamental power that becomes the extension of the will. The will is born out of it. And so this is our, like, what's driving us forward. This is why we relate it to the head, because we relate the head to our thoughts, right? In modern cosmology. But what drives us forward is actually our instincts. Even our thoughts are driven by our instincts. And so this brings us to this interesting picture. which I see as an inverted ram horns, but it's also, if you look at it, it's also 2 circles above his head. So it represents the unification of the Ida and the Pingala and the Astral and the Etheric, which means that it's the Trimurti. And the Trimurti is like the word tree. Murti in Vedic cosmology and Muti in African is very similar. Your Muti here is your magical things that you're making. Your magical work is your Muti. Now, Murti in Vedic has got a whole lot of string of associated meanings. It can relate to your Murti is relating to your circle, your people you're connected to, but also to your works, your occult works and knowledge. If you say someone, it means he's got a lot of sacred knowledge of the divine arcane. So it's very interesting because it relates to these 2 circles of the etheric and the Ida. Now, I've got a picture here that I wanted to share with us, which I think is quite important to understanding the difference between the astral and the etheric on a visceral level. And it will give us a real insight into, I think, so here we have a pentagram, right? And here we have 108 degrees. And here we have 72 degrees. And then we've got the same here. And the same here. And for each of the 5 directions, we have the 108 and 72 degrees as being the fundamental two sides of every angle. So now we're looking at a very interesting perspective here of how the 108 and the 72 come into being. Now, when we look at the Vedic cosmology, specifically, we're looking at the nature of the astral and the etheric. When we consider the Kabbalah and the Western occultism, we've assigned it to the number 72. Now, if we look at what 72 represents, it represents 64 angels under the direction of 7 archangels, under the direction of the Yahweh, if we will, right? So there's the 8th fundamental angelic being in charge over the 7 archangels, and these are ruling over the 64 lower angels. This is sort of how we have our 72, where it comes from, and we can see this sort of reflected quite well in the older works of the Essenes, where they actually break it down quite nicely. We did a round table about it, where basically told the whole story of actually, for those of you that haven't watched it, go and check it out. Previous round table, it's worth looking at. It's really going into Gnosticism, but not all that crap that everybody else is talking about on YouTube, because they've all read the same books. We're taking it from we literally just took this Gnostic story of creation, took it apart and went through it from beginning to end, and just basically pointed out certain things which are inherent in all of our traditions, which is really interesting. But getting back to the 72, what we call the quinence in Western occultism, which is really what we base everything on. We then have the other side of the coin, which is 108. Now, in Vedic cosmology, we use 108 as being the relation. There are 108 names of Shiva, of each of the deities. These are compounded by 10, so we could say there's 1,080 names, because these 108 are permuted through the cycle of 10. Right, interesting there, Kabbalah, cycle of 10, to form 1,080 names of Shiva, of Brahma, of whichever deity path you're walking. And there's always these 3 paths. There's always the Vaishnu, the middle path. There's always the Shiva, right, the ascending path. And there's always the Brahma, the descending path, bringing towards us that spirit of Sarasvati's emanation, which we experience. And there's this juxtapolarity. Now, in classic Vedic cosmology, we see that the 22 paths of the Sephirot, which is essentially where we come to our cube of space from, because the cube of space has got 12 intersections. If you examine a cube very carefully, it's got 12 intersections, and it's got 6 outer faces, and it's got 1 inner face. So when we take the 12 and we add the 7 to it, we end up with the 19, the number of the sun. And then within this, there are 3 axes. connecting the cube, right? Connecting the different aspects. So the up and above is connected by a single axis. Right and left is connected by a single axis, and forward and back is connected by a single axis. So we take these 3 axes and we take the 12 connecting points of the faces, and then we take the 6 faces themselves, and we then end up with and include the central face, because it's another direction you can travel in. You can travel inwards or you can travel in each of these directions. You end up with 22. So 22 is the number of the cube, the sacred number of the cube. And so we're looking at the Saturnian cult of the cube, the etheric worship.
Just to add to that point, I don't want to detract from your flow, but the 2 and the 2 as well. Of course, the 4 that would create the 4, which is the 4 elements. But if you take just in Arabic numerals, the 2 and reverse that, reverse the front, or 2 and reverse the front 2, and put them together, you get the love heart. That sort of quintessential symbol of the love heart. You see that in iPet Goat 2 as well, quite a lot. And of course, it links back to the Tiferet, right? The Tiferet is that central axis, the axis mundi, the cosmic pillar, right? So I think there's, and of course the love heart as well there, with that 2 and the 2, it almost seems like you have that, that hemispheric aspect to it, similar to the brain as well, right? The brain has that same hemisphere. So yeah, it's quite interesting. Not please finish your point.
Yes, but that is really quite fundamental, because when you take that cube apart or collapse it, like you say, you are now looking at the Maccabic forces, which is the other side of the coin. The Maccabic forces also work on a vector equilibrium, and the equilibrated forces, vectors of all of these different aspects of the Macabre or the hexagram, when you expand it out, it comes back to 64. So it takes 64 vectors to produce a vector equilibrium mathematically, which is the reflection of the hexagram, which is the Merkaba, which is rather interesting in itself. So I think there's some mystery to do with what you're talking about in relation to the shared symbolism between the Merkaba and the cube. But getting back to the cube, so the cube relates to the number 22, and it relates to shape. It relates to shape, it relates to form. It relates to sound that is phonetic, and that the sounds have shapes, and that the cymatic shapes of the vibrational tone of sound is what's responsible for causing matter to conform to particular patterns of substantiality. And then we're looking at the other side of it, where we have the qualities. Now, the qualities seem to be, from the Vedic perspective, we're looking at the 108. And the 108 is rather interesting, because we're looking at nine planets with going through the 12 signs of the zodiac.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now we're looking at the 9 planets. Now we're looking back at this image, right? So we're now looking at the N8. Here we are dealing with the 7, right? And the 7 principles, when we look at the 7 principles and we go, well, the 7 principles break us down into a very interesting, simple way of understanding the Hermetic principles. But notice the memory and the will. They stand between 2 spheres. So the astral field has its own will, and the etheric field has its own will. So there are 2 different wills. Even though they're one will, this will has to polarize in order to become a junction for these 2 spheres to touch. And the same can be said for memory. So when we look at memory as having 2 elements and will as having 2 elements, we then end up with the Ennead, the 9 principles, which is quite interesting, how the 9 breaks out of the 7. And the 7 is fundamentally an expression of the 3. Because there are only really 3 fundamental principles that are repeating themselves in different.
Well, this appears in the Sephiroth as well, with of course, the 7 lower or unmanifested, you could say, manifested or conscious Sephiroth, and then you have the 3 higher, Bina, Hokmah, and Keter. Of course, omitting Dat, which is the 11th hidden one, but again, hidden because it's that idea of, well, you have to go through the middle, you have to, sort of parse the middle, go between the point of temperance or knowledge, that middle pillar, become the grey man, if you will, so that you can understand this world. Between the black and the white tesserated floor of masonry, the grey men, the masons themselves, would be well, they are the ones who believe themselves to know that middle pillar. So that's the idea.
And that's a contradiction, though, right? There, that I think we find is because they think of themselves as gray men in certain cases, but they don't. It seems like they're not. It doesn't seem like they are truly going down that middle pillar. And then even in our symbolic representation of grays, like this idea of this alien force, they're just certainly not a center pillar force either. So I'm wondering why this distortion exists.
Well, I think that's got to do with the etheric plane. So look at the etheric field here. The etheric field has its own polarity. The will being the upward current, the sensations being the downward current, the instincts being the balance between the two. I correlate the instincts to being the sixth principle of Hermes, representing cause and effect. I relate this to desire. I relate desire to being the body through which instincts are finding extension. And so when you fixate yourself within desire, on the etheric plane, you are in polarity, you are in the balance between will and between sensation. And thus desire becomes the engine through which will manifest the sensations that you want. So it has to do with free will and choice. And so this on a fundamental level, you could say that the desire is the balance, is the middle pillar of the etheric field, if the etheric field is separated from the astral, and if the astral is separated from the causal, the spiritual. So in a sense, I think this is what they are. The play on words is there, and this is going to bring us back to those beings and where they are, why they are where they are, how they found themselves where they are, why they had to be imprisoned there and not here or somewhere else. So we look at this cube of space, which relates to the 22 fundamental archetypes, which are what our languages are fundamentally based upon, right? In terms of the original 22 pictograms of Paleo-Hebrew, which is really what is fundamental to the ancient Egyptian Coptic, right? Which comes from the pictorial language of hieroglyphics, maintaining that jump between the hieroglyphic astral language and the phonetic etheric language. So we switched from the astral language of hieroglyphics, which is all about the imagination and the metaphor and the concept, into the shape of sound. And defining the shape of sound as being a letter. In other words, this is what allows manifesting. It's what lets matter become shape, these letters. And at some point, the distinction between the astral and the etheric became greater. I believe they used to be working in synchronicity in a golden age in the past, where people were more in tune with their feelings, but we started to repress our feelings. And I think the repression of feelings had a lot to do with hegemony of control.
Yeah.
Because we weren't allowed to be ourselves. We weren't allowed to be our natural instincts to connect with the imagination and the intuition. And so the instincts were kept caged away from the imagination, caged away from the intuition, in order to allow for the will from the outside to program us inwards, rather than for us to transcend into the will that can drive us through the imagination into the higher memory, where we find intuition and inspiration. And so this fundamental structure of the etheric field, which I consider to be the cube, which is based on the 72, which is based on 22 archetypes. Now, in India, we have 22 tonal system for the music of the ragas. That is for healing the body and for healing the mind. But then they have a system of working with the 108 names of the deities for the mantra in order to attain to the spiritual potential. Very interesting how this distinction is there. And so the 22 bars of music became and are related, I believe, to the 22 archetypes of the 22 Paleo-Hebrew, which are what has become the Coptic and the Egyptian, which has basically become the ancient Greek, which has basically become the Latin, which has basically become English, and all the other languages between Latin and English.
Well, absolutely, yeah. Again, you're moving. Pardon me. You're moving to a more mechanistic view of everything. So from that pictographic or hieroglyphic lettering system, that script, you move towards a more mechanistic, like what you're saying, something that doesn't just allow the manifestation of thought, but it seeks to curtail thought into a sort of standardized paradigm. Absolutely, that sort of phonetic system. Another thing to mention as well is that the cube itself, if you take all sides of the cube and you interrelate them, you extrapolate that interrelation, then what you find is the 7th point in the middle, and then the abstract point, which you can draw out as the origin point of the cube, obviously creates the 8th point. So this is why the 8 is sometimes associated with, for example, it is associated with Ishtar, of course, right? Even Venus, the star of Ishtar as well, is an 8-rayed star. Again, it's the Empyrean, it's the vortex in its orthographic projection, its 2-dimensional projection. So another thing to mention with the 72, so of course, yeah, you have the 36, 72, 108. Those are the 3 or the tria prima that make up the pentacle, if you will, in terms of the degrees. Interesting, all of them add to 9. So if you look at 9 and 6, and I think this is probably why it was developed, the 9 is the ascent of the vertical spiral, or one section of it at least. The 6 is the descent of the vertical spiral, or at least, again, one section of it, right? So this is why you see the mark of the beast being 666, because it's descending through this sort of tria prima of states. Again, from the unmanifest to the partially manifest, the unmanifested to the partially manifested, and then to the fully consciously temporally manifested, the Malkuth, if you will, or the Etheric. So, also as well, linking to the 72, if you take the tetragrammaton of Yahweh and you put it through a tetractys, which is the, I guess you would say the
4-dimensional type of
No, it's more like a pyramid. It's a 10-leveled pyramid, and it's extrapolating out the name of Yahweh through these 10 layers. And if you add it all up, it adds to 72. So this is where you get the idea of the 72 names of Yahweh. I'm pretty sure there's 72 demons in the Goetia as well. It's everywhere, isn't it? Yeah. So it's speaking to something of perhaps an extra dimensional or otherworldly nature, which is influencing archetypally the individuals that are here. I've always thought as well that perhaps, again, like what we see with the Yamadutas, I believe it means the messengers of Yama, if I'm not mistaken. They, in Sanskrit, perhaps we're seeing a similar sort of harbinger type who's seeking to propel man into a virtual reality, into a mindless sort of a husk existence. I mean, you see it in Kabbalah with the term klipot, literally means shell. So to really immerse them, to impose upon them a sort of meaningless existence within a diverse panoply of the metaverse and what it can offer. Again, all illusory. None of it really has any bearing upon power, upon the affecting of the world, upon man's journey in life. And it's almost derailing him from even beginning the journey in the first place as well, the spiritual journey. So absolutely they're involved in that. I mean, I think it has probably something to do with, we look at the World Tarot card. Again, you can look at that celestially, again, from Regulus and Leo, Aldebaran Taurus, Aquarius Fomalhaut, or it's not Aquarius, it's not the constellation Aquarius, it's the equivalent constellation of Pisces Australis, which is the southern fish. And then, of course, you have Antares and Scorpio. Interrelate all of them. You go to Cassiopeia, which, if I recall correctly, I think from the Greek it means her name has power or something along those lines. So it's the same idea as the Logos notion. But also as well, right above her is Cetus. So of course we go to the Perseus myth, right, of Andromeda, which is the queen of the Ethiopians, and Cetus, the king of the Ethiopians. Cetus, funnily enough, in Greek means gardener. And then we go to the idea of the agricultural human farmers, right? And the way that they're sort of running this global plantation, perhaps, of energy. Or Robert Monroe called it loosh as well. Perhaps we view
Monroe. That son of a bitch. He definitely freaking reframed his experience and what he found out. He reframed it in his second book. Or if he was, I don't know, did he write the second book, or was that? No, he did, right? He wrote his second one.
Yeah, he did.
I don't know if he fully wrote the third one or if he died before. He's dead, right?
Oh yeah, he's dead. Yeah, I think I'm not sure if he died before the third book. I'd have to go back and check that, but
yeah, with that loosh concept, he went from being highly disturbed to then coming back and kind of reframing it to more of like, well, all energies are loosh, and it's not like we're manipulated into giving the loosh. It's kind of like this is just where that's produced on this planet.
Yes, as opposed to the. Sorry, Chris. Please finish.
Oh no, you're gonna. You know what I was gonna say. As opposed to what he originally had thought and seen, was more of like a manipulation, where this energetic, emotional sort of energy came from, or what it was needed for, and why it was being collected.
It's almost like sustenance for a higher hierarchy. I mean, that gets to the concept as well that perhaps the imposition of civilization and the hierarchies, perhaps it didn't come from the mind of man. Perhaps it was brought here by Hermes, Mercury, the messenger, again, Thoth, the Atlantean. The idea that these cycles of civilization have been ongoing in an endless cycle, an endless tsunami of cycles, that man perhaps, like what we see in the Yuga cycles and the length and breadth of them in terms of time, go on for millions of years, perhaps, God knows, billions, who knows, right? Perhaps it's an endless cycle. Perhaps as well that the comprehension of time from one moment to the next in our mind is not exactly how it is in the noumenal. Perhaps we just view this all from a sort of phenomenal or material lens. Perhaps there is no time when you reach, again, the immortal realm, which is, of course, what the Masons are all desirous of. I mean, they're clamoring for it, like like the teenagers at a Beatles concert. They're clamoring for immortality. It's quite laughable. They'll never reach it, of course, but yeah, please.
This is so on point to where we're getting to with those beings, who these guys are, where they come. So the Ogias is the Book of Giants. It was actually removed from the Bible, as far as I know, originally. Interesting. One of those 96 books that were removed. And the Ogias is like the story of Shamyaza, and how, and we find this various different translations of this. We find it in Syrian, we find it in Persian, we find it in Arabic, we find it in other Semitic languages, probably Paleo-Hebrew. I think there's a Greek version of it. We find a different version of the story in the Norse tradition, but it's the same story. It's pretty much going the same story. And so if we go into this, they used the Fikr oath. Now, the Fikr oath, imagine the universe as being an interconnected web, a network of beings that are connected through a unity of form and cause and alignment, and that this network of beings is really a seeming kaleidoscopic, expansive life of one being, which is essentially a fractal expression of all of these beings connected in the proverbial chain. And this chain of all these beings, they took an oath, and that was the Fika oath. And that Fika oath became the substrate through which this manifestation, this reality, could then be compressed into what we're experiencing. And then the story is that there was like some of these beings that broke away and they wanted their own freedom, and they aligned themselves with the giants who were on Earth. And that these beings were then working with these giants, and they were taking form here physically, and the agenda of control over humanity had been at its worst, and humans were being basically just about mined as food, or farmed like food, like farm animals, essentially controlled, used for our labor and what have you. And then there was this great war, these great wars that came, and Shemyaza and his little crew. In other stories, it's Gabriel, Raphael, Michael, and Auriel that stepped together. But regardless, he used the Fika oath, which I believe is the Tetragrammaton, which is really the manipulation of the etheric field, the manipulation of the acoustic shapes that make up the etheric field. And so the story is that these were buried in the bowels of the earth, proverbially, the underworld. The bowels of the earth is the underworld, which I relate to the etheric field. Shamanism, we have the underworld, we have the divine world, and we have the middle world. The middle world is what we would call the astral world. The divine world is what we would call the causal world, and the underworld is what we would call the etheric field. And these three parts of dream time are the construct through which the dream of reality is being manifested through these three fields in interaction. So back to this image.
What do they do? What do they do with this? What do they do with the forces that you said they were manipulating?
Sorry?
You said they were manipulating this etheric force into a particular shape.
Yes.
What is it? What is this? Continue there. Don't lose that.
This is where I'm getting to. So these three spheres are in a loop, and so that loop means that the upper and the lower are connected. The astral is that which stands between, and the etheric is that loop that sort of controls our doorway in and doorway out through the will. And so this was basically being used by the Fika oath, by Shemyaza, in order to open up the underworld and force these beings into a pocket that was carved for them in the underworld using the Fika oath, using the Tetragrammaton. A space was created for them where they were trapped and imprisoned in, where they were bound to be waiting until the end of this epoch, where they would then be churned out and dismembered, in a sense, by the proverbial exhaust of the universe. And so they are clinging on to existence.
Does this sound like another story, Silas?
It sounds like the Tartarus, doesn't it? With the Titans and such. Even the Asuras and the Devas, that idea where, well, it changes in Hinduism, but I'm pretty sure in Buddhism, they got drunk and they fell from Mount Sumeru or Mount Meru, if I'm not mistaken. And it's also similar to this idea of revelation, where, you know, I believe the sort of hell spawn, they're all cast into the bottomless pit for 1,000 years, and then they rise, and then after they're completely cast down. But it's similar to Saturn as well. Saturn is a chthonic deity. It's a deity of the sort of inverted Sephira, because it's sort of neo-Kabbalism, but there is an inverted tree of life. And you could say this is the roots of the tree of life, and the roots of the tree of life exist sort of in that state of the void, right? That they are growing powerful within the darkness. They're seeking out the light in the darkness, because they don't have the light within themselves. So it's the same idea as the Promethean fire, where man wants to use technology to externalize his own will and use the will to literally control the spirit, to control the heavens, to control the godly domain. And of course, as Yuval Noah Harari states, literally colonize everything They colonize all of the universe in a sort of Star Trek Borg type fashion. I mean, you couldn't make this up. That's honestly, I remember reading this for the first time in both Homo Deus and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and my jaw hit the floor. I couldn't believe that he would be so candid. And he also mentioned as well, he mentions, of course, very misanthropic things, but he mentions this will be the new God. This internet of all things and the algorithm will be the Lord of all things, or somewhat similar to Pashupati, right? I believe, the Lord of all animals is sometimes, or like what you're saying, the Lord of all animalism. This idea of atavism, or descending back to a primitive state. Though it has the pretense of high technology, we're actually spiritually underdeveloped, because it seems that the more we technologically advance, that we actually have a sort of disproportionate regression in our spiritual advancement. We become less spiritual the more we technologically advance. It's quite interesting. It's almost similar to what you were saying with the upper and the lower. The two, the ascending etheric and the descending astral, if I recall correctly, and of course the red, the sort of vibrating, or I guess you would say flamberged, or oscillating serpent in the middle, the red one. So yeah, I think there's something to that as well. There was something else I was going to mention, but it slipped my mind.
It's interesting too, thinking of the beginning, or at least the beginning of our modern technology that we have, at least in our history, and like how they were doing seances basically. The seance was their science, and how they were kind of trying to get information from entities that seemingly were outside of our realm. And it seems like they were the entities that were thrown in this void that Franklin was just discussing.
Well, that's exactly what they say in the Gnostic tradition too. Well, not all Gnostic traditions, I must stress that. Some of them. I think in the Setian Gnostic tradition, it talks about this notion of the pleroma, which is the fullness of the white light, essentially, of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the Kenoma, where Yaldabaoth was cast to, which means void, or the abyss. Exactly. And so,
Same
of course,
story.
Same story, exactly. It's very strange, isn't it? Everywhere we go, it's comparative. Yeah, it's almost like it's harkening back to a primordial truth. Sorry, Chris.
You know, it's interesting. Zodiac and its etymology. It's basically a circle or a wheel of animals, and it also has the words like Zion is related to zodiac.
Yeah,
and it makes me start thinking, like, is this zodiacal wheel of time that we're like the constellations and this sort of knowledge, is this just an earlier trap of technology that was placed on the people who think they're in control now, who use that as sort of a way to manifest things that they currently manifest?
They are looking back at what they call the wisdom of the ages, which is basically another metaphor or allegory, a synonym, a hidden synonym for this notion of a civilization where they almost claimed total immortality, but unfortunately in their blind hubris, they destroyed everything. And there was only a few that were left, right? Thoth or Hermes or Mercury, the messenger of the gods being one. I mean, when they talk about the gods, they believe they are the gods. I mean, I know it's insane, but they don't mean gods as in
at least
a sort
that
of...
or the fallen, like they believe their bloodline related to like some sort of god.
Exactly. This notion of the blue bloods and all of this. I mean, you look in Kabbalah as well. It also mentions in the Zohar that when one sees blue or sapphire, that it is a sort of devilish color, which shouldn't make sense because obviously it's on the right-hand side of Hesed or kindness. But if you worship the fire, if you worship destruction, then of course it would be a terrible thing to see in your dreams, right? The blue. Oh God! Oh, get that away from me. That's it's too nice, too good, too kind. Well, that's the only way I can explain that, at least. Of course, as well, there's the notion of the feminine, the mare, which is the deep blue sea.
Nice.
So
Yeah,
if you see
fire
the
and
blue,
ice.
you're seeing the female, right? The female is bad. We cut the Asherah poles down. We totally bury that sort of feminine well, it's an allegory, but the feminine principle. So we bury the heavenly, the noumenal. We can only exist in the sort of phenomenal, will-related realm, and anything out with that we destroy. It's the same with science. Science does that today. It's reductive. In fact, all religions are reductive too, in large part, bar a few notable exceptions, where they just, well, yes, we believe in God, but we anthropomorphize God. We anthropomorphize the first principle. You know, we try to put a name to it. It is the old man in the sky, right, wearing the toga, or, you know, carrying the thunderbolts. Basically, everyone has that Sky Father image. And again, the Sky Father is that which overturned the divine and ineffable mother, if you will. So you have that notion. By the way, another thing with mem or memory, we're talking about the zodiac here, and of course the Akashic records, which has, I guess, in a sort of metaphysical manner, has all possible knowledge in this sort of vastness of the mercurial ether, right, for lack of a better term, the field. Mem is the 13th letter. The 13th point, though there's some disagreement on this, is potentially Ophiuchus. Now, Ophiuchus is basically the fool. Now, he's, of course, there's a paradox there, right, with Ophiuchus. Is he dancing with the serpent, or is he wrestling with the serpent, or is he doing both? It's the same with the fool. Is the dog hearkening him over the precipice while he's staring blindly at the sun? Or is the dog, of course, Sirius, the sort of esoteric sun, if you will, is he warning the fool, or is he doing both? Right? So again, the mem is the Ophiuchus. It's the center of the zodiac. It's the center of all archetypes. It's that which encompasses all archetypes, because it is fundamentally the origin point of all archetypes. It's the sort of, it's the center of the wheel.
I think that's so on point, because if we look at the word Ophiuchus, or Ophiuchus, as I like to say it, then obviously the P and the F are interchangeable, because it's a masculine and a feminine iteration of the same consonants. So per and f are really we're focusing on the feminine, but if we masculinize that, we have OP. Okay, so OP as in, like, you know, it relates to that, like, operation, right? To which is like the connection of the R with the per and the E. The E is the yod, which is creating the seed for what will be. The R is that which is connecting it to everything else, and the P is the mouth through which this sound is being conditioned and spoken into word, deed. So the OP, and then Ea, you have to have Ea in that, because it's Enki's original name, right? Ea, it's the first deity name that there is. And then Ches, Opiaches. If you look at Ches, and it becomes known in more modern versions of Germanic and different languages from that branch, Ches means spirit, which is quite interesting, you know. So we're looking at the word spirit, the spirit of Ea, with this sound and the vibrations, and this is now the embodiment of the Fika Earth. And that Fika Earth is the tetragrammaton, which is the three worlds of the shaman, right? The Yod, the Vav, and the He, which are all reflected back in the second He, which is the permutation of the second He when it's got the potential of Yod and Vav meeting within it. becomes the second hair of the tetragrammaton. So it's the three worlds of the shaman. It's the Ishia becomes the embodiment of the other three states of being. Those three interlocking circles that I was talking about here, right? Those three interlocking circles are interlocked in the fourth sphere, which with what we call this matter. Now, this is very interesting because according to some of those notions in those old stories, and like you say, there's different versions of the story. The Shemyaza somehow beat the giants by giving them access to the Fika Earth. And because they got access to this Fika Earth, they abused it. And they changed the modulation of reality. This is where it gets really fascinating. They changed the modulation of reality to suit themselves. In the process of doing that, they locked themselves into a jail. And so you could say that they put themselves in their etheric prison that they are trapped in. And of course, they reflecting the hierarchy of the 72, because they were all about the will and about the etheric plane and perfection of the etheric. So the will was how they manifested. When you look at the 72, as we mentioned before, there are 64 angels, 64, 128, 256, 500, and, what is it? 508,
28.
2000, and 1016, 2032. Is that it? Like, we're talking about computers.
I believe
AI.
it is, yeah. I forget the actual sequence now, but I think you're on point.
Yeah, sorry, it's 14, 28, 56. Anyway, this all comes back to 64. So those 64 permutations of the etheric field are essentially what we're talking about. Sorry, excuse my throat. I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat. I think it's from climbing the mountain in the rain yesterday. But I think we can sort of get an understanding of the way in which this prison was constructed. And I think they constructed the prison by abusing the 72 potential, abusing the etheric plane in order to lock us into a cage. They locked themselves into a cage. And so the result of them locking themselves into an etheric cage means we are here. Okay, so this is now getting interesting. When I drowned when I was 3, the first thing I noticed was, okay, well, the whole universe is loud, it's vibrating, and there's different frequencies. And as the frequency gets higher, I'm moving further from that, whatever I was in. And there's 3 things. So the universe is made out of 3 things, these 3 spheres. This is all there is. That's why it's blue, yellow, and red, the 3 primary colors, right? And so these 3 things get taken out of each other. And within each of those 3 things, there's another 3 things. It's like, oh, wow. So there's 3 things, and each 3 things has got 3 things, and they're taken out. And the whole thing starts to unravel, and they get pulled apart like strings. And your memories are at the core. And so as these things are unraveling, your memories are going, and that's scary because you now have to forget who you are, who you love, your parents, father, whatever. And so you're being like taken out of who you are, is removed from you. And that's when you start to get to that place where you start to see through that, and you start to pierce it, and you start to see where you come from. And the immediate thought, now I was 3 years old, right? 1978. Suddenly I'm like thinking, I'm like an adult consciousness. So I'm a child, I'm 3 years old. Now I'm understanding the universe from a different perspective because I'm no longer 3 years old. I'm a different age. And I'm noticing, damn, how did they trick me to be in there? First thing, like conscious now, at 3, I don't have any formations of any theories or philosophies or ideas or ideologies or beliefs, nothing. I'm 3 years old, right? I know nothing about nothing. It's just a pure experience of what's going on. Hence, there's no dramas and nonsense. It's just watching the universe turn inside out, watching it unravel, the 3 aspects torn out of each other, watching as the vibrations are getting faster and the louder and faster and louder and faster and louder and faster and louder, that the whole universe is just one big sound. And I'm like, wow, this is intense. And then I'm like, memories stripped out of me. And then I'm like, no longer who I used to be. I'm now someone else, right? And I'm like, how the hell did they trick me to being in there? Recognizing that that's not my home. I'm not from there. And that I've been tricked into being trapped in there, but now I'm actually coming home. I'm like, thank God I'm coming home. Shucks, that's weird place. This all I'm reeling at the memory of this weird place I've been trapped in. And at that point, I'm brought back, right? Because my body's taken out of the water. So there wasn't any drugs involved. I wasn't in an operating theater. There was no morphine or anything. It was just the agony of drowning. The only drugs that happened was when this little thing in your head pops and the juices come out. And that's when you feel the vibrations. And then the whole universe is just, you hear it. You hear it all. That's how you're traveling. You're traveling on your ears. So then when I came back into my body, I realized, wow, this is all just dream. We're living in a dream, and the dream is inside out. Because when you leave your body and you're going there, everything turns the right way around. They inverted reality for us. They managed to invert reality somehow, using the Fika oath, using the ability to manipulate the etheric plane in order for them to keep us what they thought was trapped. But in the process of trapping us, they trapped themselves in their own ignorance. Now, their only way to not be dissolved and lost in the echoes of time is through us.
Oh, shit.
We are their only opportunity for them to hang on to life.
Yes,
And
this
so
is the
now
same
they
as,
need to prey on our spiritual potential in order for them to try and reinvert reality back their way.
But wait, if the only way for them to return is us, does that mean the only way for us to return is them? Are we in a symbiotic relationship that's also parasitical because they haven't learned how to stop that shit?
Well, this may relate to actually the atomic structure of that toroidal moment, which is again the hourglass shape, right? Which is again all men are stars, right? Climb high, climb far. Your goal is light, your dream the stars, or something along those lines, as it says in Masonry. So we are all pinpricks of light amongst this void of the Kenoma. We're sort of little fragments of the pleroma which sits behind that veil of that void. And like what you're saying, we're almost like the hourglass or the figure eight or the solar analemma. We are sitting between the lower and the upper as man. We're almost like the serpent itself. We're like the spine. We connect the lower with the upper. We're like the magician of the tarot deck, right? This sort of prima materia in that sense. But it really does. It does make you wonder, because the way I look at it is the way Inception put it forth. I think it was Inception, that entire movie was this idea that we see in Hinduism of Brahma dreaming existence into being, and this sort of Maya aspect, this illusory aspect that's of course built into the dream, right? And we can, it's ironically, or no pun intended, it's tangible to us, this illusory aspect of the dream. And you see with the Inception, within the dream, you almost have white blood cells, right, which act as an immune system to maintain the dream, to maintain the reverie of it, to maintain the equilibrium of it. So you have the unconscious NPCs, which are projections of the dreamer.
It's the same idea as Matrix and Agent Smith.
Exactly.
Or
yes.
All the agents, actually. I wouldn't say Agent Smith, actually, but the other agents. Anyone could be an agent, and then they attack you once you start.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And you have the Scarlet Woman as well, because again, like Isis with the veil, Neo, literally Anderson from the Norse means son of man. So Mr. Anderson is literally the Mr. Son of Man, and Neo is the new man. He's never called Anderson. That's a sort of dead name that he never is called after he becomes, I guess, the One. And of course, Neo is an anagram of the One, right? One is new, the new thing. So all things will centripetally go back to the One. And from the one will come the two, come the four, come the eight, so on and so forth, right? The Lichtenberg pattern of growth. That which is born, lives, it dies, burns up, it returns and gives birth to new. It's subsumed by the earth and gives birth to new expressions of life. So it's that notion that was really encoded in his name and all of that. But he is looking at the Scarlet Woman. He's looking at Isis, trying to unveil her, but he cannot unveil her until he comes to that understanding that he's in a simulation, or, of course, like what we're saying, a dream. And who tells him that? Who tells him that anyone could be an agent? Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. And the morph is, of course, we still have it today, the metamorphosis, the transformation. All of that is linked into this idea of morph, which is, again, like Maya, probably comes from the same root, I can imagine, which is, it's illusory, it's fluid, it's mercurial, right? It's both metallic, it's rigid, but it's fluid as well. And the only time I believe it ever becomes hardened or rigid is when it's in, I think it's just below freezing. So the freezing temperature of water, and of course in room temperature it becomes warm again. So it's this notion that we exist in Hades, which is the cold realm, Niflheim, hell with one L, the Norse sort of afterlife or underworld of the cold. The Kur is another one. The Sumerians and Akkadians have other names for this place. Again, it's a chasmic cavern. It's cold. It's damp. It's a place where the dead go and they sort of shuffle around like clip otter husks. You could say a lot of people today are similar in that regard, right?
Well, but then, in a way, it almost sounds like we trapped ourselves instead of there being like the 64, these giants that have been fractalized into us. How much of that is us? How much of us is them?
Well, when does the creation, which, of course, if a creator, or let's take a painter, for example, when he paints this glorious painting, he's got all the subjects and that, ultimately, he views the painting as just one entire thing. He may, he views it holistically, but he may view the subjects in their sort of individual state. But ultimately, the individual aspects of that subject are a mere illusion. It's a greater sort of part of the illusion of the painting, because ultimately all of it is just one hue that he's just he's sort of shaded and used the paintbrush to divide those hues and shadows into what we perceive as beings of perception, because all perception is based on the delineation of form, as separate individual beings, but they're not necessarily in their true essence separate. It's like what Carl Jung stated: if you take a tree and us, ultimately, fundamentally, in the essence of the cosmos, we are all one and the same. And I don't mean that in a sort of a hippy dippy way. I mean it in a more cosmic, or you could say scientific way, right? So fundamentally, it's all leading back to that same idea that we're in a dream. Of course, you've got to be aware who you talk to as well about this stuff, because the Gnostics had the idea of the Hylics, the wooden-headed ones, the ones who are in the Hylis, the matter, the world of matter, purely of matter. Again, they're like the NPC projections of the unconscious in Inception. They protect the dreamer by killing the foreign element within the dream that tries to awaken the dreamer. So this is why you've got to watch who you say these things to, because they will become, some even become violent. They'll become vehemently opposed to you.
Let's get back to then what Franklin was saying, because then how, Franklin, how would you see this with what you were saying with this reflection of the 64 giants into fractals that were imprisoned themselves by accident by imprisoning us? Like, how would this relate? You're muted.
You're muted.
What do you mean specifically? Relate to what specifically? Because there was quite a lot just said. There's a lot to unpack. You're talking about the hierarchical system?
Basically, yeah, with like these entities that we would then be interacting with either in the material or the etheric or the astral from what happened here.
I believe they used the etheric to embed themselves within our psyches. And they embedded themselves within our psyches through the 7 sins. Greed, avarice, wrath. All of these beings went in league with these creatures. And so these beings were born. So maybe they created these beings that live through us, that gives them a chariot way to pull us, to control us, our greed, so through all of these emotional complexes that prevent us from reaching into the astral, keep us trapped in the etheric form, they have access to us and sustenance from us.
And if they projected themselves into these like 7 deadly sins that are then part of the psyche of man, and then to the most negative portions of it. And then these people who then reflect these parts of the psyche, they die and become disembodied. Then they're in kind of their world now as well. They're in these other entities' world where not only what they did has affected where their spirit is like kind of the state of it. Also, they have this attachment that then seems to be working on people in the material plane. Because it seems like these disembodied entities are what the societies that seem to run everything always have reached out to. It's like always like a channeling, always a seance.
Maybe this has got a lot to do with the re-engineering of our genetics and using the tetragrammaton and the knowledge to re-engineer our genetics in order for them to be able to have this fluidity and this connection with us. And then I see genetics as being the substrate of reality through which the consciousness field is able to manifest the etheric field, right? So this consciousness spiritual field manifests itself into a smaller astral field, and the smaller astral field has to compress itself into a smaller etheric field, and that smaller etheric field has to compress itself into a very small, tight little physical field. And so these dimensional shifts of compression has sort of got us trapped in this very small portion of reality, where reality is much bigger and the etheric field is much bigger than what the physical field is. This is why there's this time dilation. And when we go from the etheric field to the astral field, which is where our dreams are like created in the astral field. Like you can be dreaming. So there's all this lucid dreaming and everybody wants to get control of their dreams. But if you actually in a lucid dream decide, I'm dreaming, I'm not going to control whether I can fly or not. I'm not going to control what I can do. I'm going to control the substrate of the entire dream. I'm going to be God of this dream. And if you choose that, then you sort of expand yourself out around the whole dream. And the dream unravels. And when it unravels, you're floating in this space. You're like, okay, this is fluid space where I'm floating in. Like, where am I now? And so it gives us this idea that the dream is sort of constructed in the astral field when we're focusing towards the etheric forms, and the forms of the etheric get imprinted through our emotions, through these emotional context into our consciousness that we experience this reality. I think these beings are trapped in one of those realities. They're trapped in a dream reality, and the only way they can stay alive is through us.
Yes.
The Sandman, right?
It's interesting too how like we have like this idea of the disembodied entities again. With it matches with the obsession with like this necromancy, this like controlled dead matter. We are a
Yes.
society that wants to reanimate the dead. Basically,
Well, that's the metaverse.
Yeah.
The dead
Yeah.
verse. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the. Oh, sorry, Chris. Please
Is
finish
it
your
to
point.
bring in these entities, basically?
Well, the potter will always create the vessels that are required to hold the sort of liquid that cascades into it. So perhaps this is what I've stated, that they're digitally terraforming the planet. Now, even the idea of the digi or digit is this idea of the sand, right? It's the sand which was once, a full rock, a full stone, which of course has symbolic connotations to masonry itself, a body, but now it's all broken down into these, you could say, atomized grains, to be passed through this sort of bottleneck, if you will, of the hourglass, right? The midpoint. So basically what you're seeing with virtual reality is they understand the dreamscape of the world, and they're perhaps attempting to create, in a sort of concentric manner, like a matryoshka doll, another dream. Everything's artificial intelligence. Everything, of course, is smart, which, by the way, I believe has connotations in Sanskrit as well. So there's probably something deeper with that too. It's all of it is really recreating a dream within a dream, because it's like what Mark Twain stated. All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream, and then you have Pindar mentioning man is but a dream of a shadow, and then you have that same idea, that meme, if you will, that was parroted in Ecclesiastes of the New Testament, where it states, man is but a shadow of a shadow. So you have these same ideas. And of course, this links with the camera obscura notion.
Mhm.
This, you could take something and then project it, but its projection will be inverted. This is why perhaps we see the world as an inverse. Our mind is that thing which has to flip it the right way around. Even the rainbow as well. The red is at the bottom, the purple at the top, and of course in the chakra system, it's usually the other way around. And you saw the same thing with the Zoroastrians and the Hindus, where the Ahuras or the Asuras and the Devas were all flipped upside down. I believe Surya as well, where Asura comes from. Surya is the sun, is it not? So Asura would be the negative with the A prefix. So you have this idea of the sort of black sun. Those who are of the sun, those who are of the black sun or the malefic sun, or even perhaps even the esoteric or hidden sun. So this notion of Saturn as well, right? But Saturn isn't necessarily malefic or evil on its own. I think whoever is in charge of us, whoever they are answering to, both in this realm and in realms unseen, it's given them a very distorted picture of things. But I think you're onto something as well. They need sustenance from somewhere to allow them to exist within this world until their great work is finished. This sort of interdimensional or extra dimensional entities, these sort of immaterial things, or they appear immaterial to us. The principalities and powers that rule us, as the Bible states. So yeah, I think there is something to that, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't make sense when you look at history. How could you have, well, for example, the mercantilist class of who deal in fiat currency? I can't imagine through, I don't know what, 4,000 years or 3,000 years, however long this sort of Ponzi scheme has been going on, how have they not been overthrown?
Yeah.
It baffles the mind. How has an individual who was indebted to them not managed to gain enough gumption, galvanized his spirit enough to overthrow them. It just doesn't make sense. Unless, of course, there's something else at play here. And what we're in is a very carefully and scientifically managed system, a field of, crops by which the satyr, there's another idea as well, satyr repotenet opera rotas, or the reverse, which it probably came from Kabbalah.
And that's what I was just thinking of that, because when you said the pieces like the sand, like grains of sand, I was thinking it's like they want to take us and put us in like the hyperbole permanently instead of the torus. It's like they want to put us in the hyperbole, this like, which is basically the void. They want us in the void permanently, and it's like that's the reverse of the torus. Just like, and then you have the tenet, which is, I mean, the whole story of the movie, another film by Nolan, who same person who did Inception, with the inversion of time.
Yeah.
And I mean, you'll notice these people, they always say the ancient future, what is it? It's like the ancient future or the future's past. They always use one version of this when talking about the future.
Yeah.
Almost like we're going in like a loop.
Yes, yeah, it's an archaeo-futurist thing, and
Crowley especially talked about this a lot.
Oh yeah. I mean, what you've got to realize is these people. Well, look at Kissinger, for example. I mean, these people, to their dying day, until they take their last breath upon this planet, they have this fire, this zealous fire, where they just don't let up. Totally relentless in the way that they want to bring about this notion. And it's some of the most learned men in society have this very strong religious, well, it is, yeah, it's a dogmatic religious idea that they can bring to bear on the world, impose upon the world what they call a utopia, but for the rest of us will be a complete and utter dystopia. They want to impose this sort of magnum opus, this great work. It really, you know, is complete inversion. It's summed up by the idea of ordo ab chaos. I mean, that's ultimately, if you were to put it into the 3 words, that's pretty much it. Order out of chaos, ordo ab chaos in the Latin, of course. And they seek to use destruction as a way to establish a world that is, well, a sort of phoenix from the ashes. So
that's an interesting point that you make about, you know, and I think it's going to tie into the abduction story as well. Now, I believe that the Frankists that were the followers of
Sabbatean.
That guy's name.
Sabbatean.
The Frankists.
Sabbatai Zvi.
Yeah, Sabbatai.
Exactly, Sabbatai. With this guy's twisted philosophy that I'm sure that those of you that are watching this probably know. If you don't, go and look up the Frankists, go and look up the Sabbatai, so-called prophet that was like banned from all synagogues for a really interestingly good reason, because of his ideas being too way out there. And that became the Zionist movement, which I believe is what we saw in the USSR, the infiltration of the state through that what do they call it, the Bolshevik revolution. So, but they also had this takeover in Western states, and the whole idea behind Frankism from the Sabbatean philosophy was that they need to infiltrate all religions, every organization, government, governance, police, education, and the Masonic order. I think that they went into the Masonic order. I think that they infiltrated it. I think they infiltrated the Golden Dawn movement. I think that originally the great work was something that related to bringing these 3 circles.
Yes, I agree.
Into one circle.
Exactly. But they
that you were living in all
all
3 worlds at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in balance and harmony, and that the Trimurti of that thing on top of Pashupati's head, representing the bringing together of those two opposing potentials, which really
Exactly.
means having control of your desires, those 7 beastly little buggers that are in our heads that keep us trapped in this world of money and form and all the things that are unhealthy for us, be they drug addictions or doing bad things or dishonesty, whatever. It always comes back to those desires. And also they're the source that can empower the world to take us up the tree or to
Yes.
bring us down into this depth of the underworld and understand. And I think what you said earlier, Chris, is like really poignant about how our way back to the divine is actually through these creatures, and that they have embedded themselves within us in some way. So we have to overcome them. Literally, we have to overcome these base emotions, and we need to sort of the alchemical fire. We need to alchemically purify our systems so that those emotions become our slave. And when those emotions are our slaves, they can't control us. Then we're free of them. Then we're able to transcend and move into the more holistic state of consciousness, which involves all 3 of these spheres being in one, which I believe was the great work. But I think that they hijacked the great work sometime in
Exactly.
the 1800s or the 1700s. And now the great work has become something very different, like you're talking about, all of these crazy Kissinger types that are out there to basically turn us into, well, they don't want our bodies to be what our bodies are anymore. They want to give us new bodies. They want to change our physical form and our life and our system. Everything about it has to be according to their will. And so that etheric field is all about the will. It's all about conforming everything to a will, which is what magic has become. Do as thou will, which is really certain groups of magicians. I believe that in the old times, it wasn't do as thou will. I think the magical formula was quite different. I think high magic was what people were practicing as opposed to natural magic. And so they were really about transforming themselves to become perfectly in tune with the divine forces so that they can transcend. But at some point, there were certain administrators put on earth to keep the control, so that high magic then revolved meeting up with these beings and getting told what to do, basically getting told what you need to, where's your next step. These enlightened beings will give us what we need to know instead of us being able to actually ourselves become enlightened. The gnosis is lost in the tubes of the drainage of the consciousness, and now we are sort of back to this hierarchical state, which is really, I think, the currency of the 8th sphere. And so without getting too lost in that, bringing the conversation back to what you were talking about now, I think, as we are looking at this world around us and how they have sort of transformed our ideologies and our philosophies and our very connection to the spirit, this AI situation is a way for them to have greater control of our physical world without needing intermediaries. Until now, they needed humans as intermediaries. But it's like we were having this conversation with PK, and PK was saying, well, they're not really that clued up. They're not really that jacked up. They're not really that in control of the world. That just seems to be, they that we're talking about, the people, the puppets aren't. But puppets are only puppets. Who's controlling the puppets is on a whole nother level. Now, who's controlling the puppets has realized they don't need those puppets if they have an AI system that's literally inserted into our physical bodies, right?
Yes.
That can literally interface with our neural pathways and actually change the way
one
we think
ring,
so that they can ensure.
the one
Yeah.
ring to rule them all. Yes.
There also be some sort of because you were saying this, like, how was I tricked coming back here? Like, as much as you might have to reintegrate these things, it seems like even if you do, there's still something preventing us from leaving.
See, I don't necessarily think. Of course, perhaps there is an exit to this place, right?
And I don't
I
mean
think-
leaving just now. I just mean after we, like, naturally leaving after when it's our time, we die, and then leaving from instead of reincarnating
Yes,
over and over
instead
again.
of
That's what I
getting
mean.
put back into that sort of cosmic soup again in the
Yeah.
cycle. See, I think the reason that we're here is almost we act as talismans ourselves. That we are here to try and maintain balance. The reason we take on these this certain archetype of, well, at this point, the rebel against the evil. So we are the good and they are the evil, again, to be very simplistic about it. Then, we seek order and they seek disorder or something along those lines. Then it's to try and maintain balance. It's like like applying a brake to an accelerating car. It's to try and slow it down.
Yeah, and I know what you're saying. We're basically trying to. I mean, it's either balance or we're trying to totally. It's like all for one and one for all. If everyone doesn't come, we don't leave.
Yes, but if we're permutations of the dreamer, then
we would just want balance.
Yes, the dreamer wants balance because remember, the dream wants to maintain itself.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that awakens the dreamer, that, if you bring him too much into the nightmare or the utopia or the paradise, then, of course, like Dante's Inferno, right? You want to keep him in the purgatory, in this sort of balanced state.
Because if we let it get too bad,
or too good,
the dream collapses.
Yeah,
and
because you can't suspend your disbelief,
and that means existence collapses.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's probably the reason that you have this autonomous or involuntary cropping up of for like the likes of us, right? I mean, I didn't choose this.
I almost think it might be voluntary. We might choose it once we see how bad it is and see its state of it.
We could, yeah. I mean, I have to be honest. I think it's involuntary. I mean, I'm. If you had said to me 12 years ago when I was a diehard atheist, I'd be on a show talking about mythology and religions and the occult and cosmogony and all of this, I'd have laughed right in your face. But there's like a quickening going on. We are not really in control of our lives. Again, like the dream gives us the illusion that we're in control of our avatar, but we're not really. Fundamentally, the dream, like the river of the Eridanus and Orion upon it, the headless dreamer, the headless god, we can't really control it. Until we can control it, then we, of course, are sort of under the cosh of it. So we meander with the river, with the current of the river, like we meander with the current of the dream. While we're in there, we're sort of autonomous.
Well, I wonder if you would think this, like, so say we find ourselves after a lifetime looking back and really seeing that there's such a disbalance that if you don't return, everything ceases to exist anyways. It's not really a choice then.
Yes.
Then you're kind of forced into going back, even if you don't want to, but you are still choosing to, because you could leave, but that leaving would essentially mean you're blotting yourself, basically, I guess, or you would at least be raising the chance that you're blotting yourself out of existence permanently by waking the dreamer. Yeah.
Yeah. If you awaken from the dream, you stop existing in this sort of realm, in all of its concentric multiplications, right? So you go beyond that. What is beyond that? Who knows? Maybe it's another wheel within a wheel within a wheel. I don't know, but technically, if you went beyond this point, if you did awaken from the dream, then of course existence would cease, because existence is contingent upon the dream and the dreamer's immersion within that. Another thing is,
and it's not even you awakening; it's the source consciousness of this dream awakening that you're just a piece of.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So after so many cycles, eventually all of it gets purified, if you will, and will re-emerge back into that That's it will centripetally go back to the source, if you will, the 0 point of order. So
which I think all of us hope would be a sort of instead of merging into like a one, it would kind of give us all our own individuality and in that sense. But I don't know if that's the way it's supposed to, if that's how it's gonna work or not. I mean, it seems like that would be the ideal situation.
I think
Yeah.
Jump in, man.
No, please finish your thought, brother.
No, I was just going to mention as well that when we look at this, and sorry, I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but just really quickly, when we look at these ideas of sort of the I guess you would call them cosmic parasites, right? Those who gain sustenance from us, the dreamer, then, of course, the dreamer himself, though he's in a reverie whilst he's in the dream, he's denied the truth. He's denied the truth of everything, which is what we see, of course, in the Hellenic idea of drinking from the river of forgetfulness. But I think it's called the Aletheia. So those who are spectating the dreamer, who may be even crafting the dream, it's those unseen forces that, of course, gain some form of whatever energetic sustenance from the dreamer being immersed within the dream. So even with the dreamer awakening from that, he can't really be fully aware of who is gaining sustenance from his dreaming unless he is actually in the dream himself. You have to, it's like Alice going down the rabbit hole.
That then adds a whole matrix within a matrix within a matrix.
Exactly. Well, it's the reason of why we descended spiritually. We involuted ourselves to thus gain conscious evolution, because conscious evolution is the truth of this all. It's the truth of the cycles. It's basically what we're discussing here is systems theory, not just systems theory from our terrestrial point of view, but everything. And it's the reason it must be true is because it's a fabric. We're literally weaving a fabric here of interrelations, interdependencies, cosmically, terrestrially. So all of it must harken back to a singular source of truth, a divine science of the nature of the world. So basically, it feeds into everything. I mean, this is why I began looking at probably 5 years ago. I mean, I've looked at all of these topics years and years and years back, but I didn't really quite understand it back then. Last 5 years since the event in 2020, I started writing a book on military history, and then before you know it, I'm here, because all of it's all interdependent. All of it's a multidiscipline. This is why they really love to have specialization, because if you're a specialist, an expert, if you will, you don't have a holistic view. You're not a Renaissance man. You don't have a holistic view of life. Therefore, you can never escape. It's like what Steiner stated regarding the mathematics and the arithmetic, right? You view the sum instead of the whole, right? You become fixated on the parts. Sorry, please.
Yeah, no, I'm totally sort of keeping track of what you're saying, and sort of the dreamer and reality. I think that's what this image represents. The Sushumna, the Ida, and the Pingala, as these three fundamental worlds, three fundamental principles, bound in an interplay and a dance. And that interplay and the dance is what we call this reality. And you can't take them apart, because this reality is the dance of the Sephirot, the containers, the shape, the form, with the energy of the astral to fill those containers with energy, and then the Shashumna to direct the course of this process of the energy filling the containers, of the chakras resonating with the Sefirot. And I just want to say, for people that are working with chakras or people who are working with Sefirot, there's no one that's better than the other. What you do to the one side happens to the other side in terms of mathematical equation. It sort of holds true. So if you work on your Sefirot, your chakras are being affected. If you work on your chakras, your Sefirot are being activated. They work in conduit and in synchronicity. What you do to your emotional field will translate to the way that your mind works and thinks. How you shift the way that your mind thinks will translate to the way that you feel. They are like this, like that picture, bound around each other and an extension of each other through this reality. They are bound in the Shashumna. And so these three principles, the three muti, this is going back to those three faces that we were talking about earlier, right? The three faces, the three-headed deity, if you will, representing the Trinity and the triple goddess. Let's not forget the triple goddess, an older form of what we know as the Trinity, in my opinion. I'm not sure about that, but that's what I believe. Though, regardless, the chicken or the egg, which came first, I don't think it matters. I think they're all part of the same thing, just perceived and experienced in a different way. And I get this strong sense that there's this correlation here with dream time. They don't want us to realize that we're in a dream. I think that's how they can control us. When we start realizing that this is all just a dream, then we can't be afraid. Because how can you be afraid of a dream? It's not real. And so fear is one of the abduction tools. So there are beings that abduct people. So you can be abducted through fear. The lizards, in my experience, work with fear. They use fear. And they wear these suits. They're like armor. And then they are very archonic in the way that they look. In fact, they look like the archons, but like in physical form of the archons. And the suits that they wear, I believe, gives them the ability to jump through the ethers and interact with us. So those guys will literally take us out of our body using fear. Very often sexual stuff happening that's not pleasant on the physical world can trigger this, or happening in the dream time. And so they'll be sexualizing their victims in a not so pleasant way in order to generate the fear necessary to disconnect them from the physical, so that they can take them on a journey in order to condition them elsewhere. It's about conditioning. Then there's the other beings that use the higher aspects of the emotional field. So those of us that seek enlightenment and seek to be free and pure and spiritual, those will get ascended masters coming to us, or we'll get Jesus, or we'll get the Buddha, or we'll get some angel or whatever that will be giving us this incredible wisdom. And we know so many people have written books about this, and they believe they found the answers and whatnot and whatever. And so that's the other abduction tool that I'm aware of, that I have experience with, which I believe is the more insidious form. That's not the lizard beings, that's the insectoid beings, from my experience, that use that technology. And they don't use suits. They literally bring their crafts over the earth. I don't believe they come from somewhere else. I think they come from inside the earth, but I don't know this for a fact. But I think these ant creatures come from inside the earth, but they have technology. They have these like masks that they put over their face.
Well, this gets into the idea of the more physical aspect of all of this, and if it's like a technology that's being used by controllers of like social engineers that are actually human, or at least as human as they can be,
or even chimeric as well.
Yeah.
It could be that. I mean,
that
it's
started dabbling maybe with some of this technology themselves, or with their children, or with other entities or other animals, or God knows what. I mean, there's something weird. I don't know if you guys have seen that shark, the zombie shark that exists in the heavy water, in the deeper aspects of the ocean. to me, that almost looks like a chimera. I mean, I think it's called chimera, a chimera shark, which is really fucking weird because it's like, it looks like a zombie shark, like that was stitched together, and its eyes look like cameras. And when I look at it, I'm like, is this something that some sort of group of eugenicist type scientists just threw together while they were like in the pressures of the underwater, like an underwater lab that they have somewhere, and it somehow made this entity, and that's why it looks the way it does, why they even called it a chimera.
It's interesting as well because you have a lot of these sort of, like what you're saying, very deep sea creatures. The deeper obviously they reside within the sea, the more stranger their anatomy is. They of course they even look horrific in most cases. In most cases, they're horrific.
The weird thing is, gigantism is attached to the deeper you get bigger.
Yeah.
For some reason, and I have no idea. There's something to do with the pressure or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very strange. You get other very, for example, bioluminescence is very prevalent in those regions too. You have the I forget what the fish's name is now, with the lamp in front of it. Oh god, I'm gonna have to look up the fish's name. That's gonna bug me now. Where it has this bioluminescent lamp or vestigial protrusion from its head, which it uses to hunt. Yes, I forget what they call it now, but it looks horrific, absolutely horrific. Looks horrific, absolutely, and yeah.
My son digs that one.
So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Franklin, but just when you were talking about the kind of entities from here that could be like the ant type of entity or something like that, just made me think of, is this part of what these entities are? Because I mean, there comes a point too where so many people, I mean, millions have said they've had some sort of weird abduction experience. I mean, you can't say all of them are insane, and it's never good. It's never good.
There's another potential as well that, see, it's interesting because when they started work on these remote technologies to control individuals' minds, you would call them the voice of God technologies and other things, again, to remotely interfere 100%. With almost the toroid field of oneself, or the dynamic electromagnetic field that we all have and possess. Of course, this is what most of their psychotronic technology is based upon too, right? That they were looking into cybernetics, the human use of human beings. He discussed an artificial sense organ. Of course, we have that right now with the phones, but he wants that implanted. All the way back in 2001, they were talking about in Loyola, of course, Ignatius Loyola, the Kabbalistic founder of the Jesuit order. Loyola University in 2001 held a conference there, and I think it was either Kurzweil or another individual that's part of that group, and he was mentioning that we already have the technology now to have brain-computer interfaces. We're just waiting for the right moment, because we don't think, we're waiting for the right event, because we don't think people will accept it en masse. So it's this same notion. But he mentioned too that they could indirectly, and sort of, it's the same idea as the active denial system. It's just less sort of violently interfering with the biological system. It interferes with the mind. So, they were saying
basically you could stimulate an abduction experience without
actually having it. Yes, it could. You could hear voices. You could hear things in your mind. You could actually see things which were not there. It's extraordinary.
Think this is probably a majority of them are.
Yes, but the thing is as well, getting back, see this idea of even the lizards and the insects, that whenever you see these individuals talk about how they want humanity to be, that anglerfish, yeah. Thank you. Sorry, somebody just posted it in the comments, the fish, yeah. Thanks. So the way they want human beings to be is social. They say we're only partially social. They want us to be like a termitory or an ant mound or a beehive, which in that sense, we're only partially social because we give up some sort of free will to the group for a mutual benefit. The ant, the termite, the bee, the drone does not do that. What it does is it gives its entire life over without question to almost in a socialistic sense, right? Over to the hive, and this is how they want humanity to be. So they want, again, Nietzsche's last man, the multiplication of 0 by 0, more insect than man. So they want, they want, in that sense, to create a allegorical chimera through technology. And then there's another thing too that, I mean, Yuval Noah Harari states that the only way to deal with the quote useless class from the coming AI revolution is by a combination of drugs and video games or virtual reality. Bertrand Russell stated the same thing in his book Impact on the Impact of Science on Society, 1956, where he discusses through a steady inclusion or implementation of a strict diet of injections and indoctrination, we can create a more desirable character that will actually be taught and will believe on a moment's notice by our very diktat that snow is black. So how can you bring that in without failure unless you have control over the torus field, the natural field, the natural inclinations and mental landscape of man on demand by some sort of grid-like control system that is remote, it's subtle, it's unseen, and it's something that's carried through, like what you were saying, the ether, the air. Remember, Satan is the prince of the air. Enlil, very similar, of course. Well, he's likened to Jupiter, but he's very similar to a Saturnian archetype, which was his son, Nurta. Again, a controlling aspect, Ahriman, this notion. So it's all really encompassed in this notion of the air, of the notion of the electromagnetic wave, controlling the wave, oscillating the wave, modulating
the air
the
is
wave.
the field.
Exactly.
It's just a new field. It's not on the ground anymore now.
Exactly. And basically, the physical aspect of this agenda, this is what it gets down to. This is the science of it. But the science that we're discussing here links back to the occult. It all comes from the occult. I mean, it's of course, the occult take these technical documents and they put it in symbolism. Because again, if they destroyed themselves in this Atlantean or precursor civilization, Thoth would have taken these, or whoever it would have been, would have taken these technical drawings to these barbarians, as they're called in Egypt at the time, this black land, but due to the fertile soil. He would have taken these barbarians, these technical drawings. They wouldn't have understood what they were after a few generations, so they would have philosophized on them. But they would have had an inkling of, well, this is what the precursor civilization was doing. And we are the elect because we understand this, and the laity do not. But we control the laity through this sort of a misrepresentation, this misleading of the symbolism. So you're basically seeing in the symbolism technical projections of this deep sacred science that can be used for good, but it can also, of course, be used for very nefarious things as well.
I think the sacred knowledge that we've got is essentially physics and science. I don't think they're separate. I think once you understand the laws of consciousness, you understand the laws of physics, the matter, because matter, I am very much from a pan, pan is really where we are at, but this is really a reflection of consciousness. So to me, I can't really draw a distinction between consciousness and matter because I literally see reality as being a dream. And
So the only problem with the
and-
people who, so it's not everyone who thinks this way it's problematic, but it becomes problematic when the people who think that way then totally think, well, if I understand physics, then I understand consciousness, so then that's all I need to understand. Then F natural law, I don't need to understand that. So it's like the moral aspect of everything then that seems to be what happens with these like elite families who have this technology and hold on to it. The moral aspect of it doesn't seem to matter to them.
I think they do have a morality. I think their morality is just upside down.
No.
They've
Yeah.
got their own form of morality, which is like more of all, please. It's greed-based, right? I want more of all, more all, not morale. So, and they get their morale from getting more. So the etheric field is all about like form and what you've got, substance.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about morality, we're talking about qualities. We're talking about the astral, talking about the emotional connection between human beings, love and compassion. And I see these as all being astral reflections of the divine, which is essentially that which is the balance of the etheric and the astral. And then that is sort of doing this. And so here's vibration. Without the astral and the etheric doing this, there wouldn't be vibration. And if there wasn't vibration, then there could be no drawing forth from the first principle to allow the other 6 principles to come into being in order to manifest the two polarities of the 2 principles that act as the go-between, which is cause and effect and polarity.
That also
And
might be
so-
why they keep us around, why they keep regular people around, because of that polarity. They might have lost the ability to sort of connect to that those astral emotions and everything like that. So they need those who can.
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of interesting how there's a lot of sci-fi films where you see them studying the dreams of multiple large groups of individuals. I know they had this in the OA where they were studying dreams. I mean, they study dreams in real life, like group dreams, and like it's almost like they don't have dreams sometimes. Like there is no ability to do that.
Here's an interesting thing, right? So, like most of my life, I practiced meditation on like a full-time basis. So while other people were doing like the 9 to 5, I was doing the 9 to 5 of meditation. And what I noticed was the more I meditate and the deeper I go into a state of unified consciousness, where all aspects of the mind and the brain are working together like a team, tag team, and focused into the center of the head. So all the conduit of thought and emotion and everything is channeling in that same, which then becomes like a direct connection and extension of the heart, which is then like directly bound in our pelvic cup.
Mhm.
And what I noticed was that the more I get into deep meditation, the less I dream, because I'm like consciously processing that information during the day. So I would put my head down and I would just close my eyes and open my eyes, and 6 hours has passed. But I'm like supercharged, awake, energized. And it's like last night I didn't sleep very much. I only slept like 4 hours, right?
Same.
But it doesn't bother me. I've noticed that like a lot of people, they can't operate on less sleep. And I think that the reason people can't operate on less sleep is because they have too much unconscious, unprocessed information that's taking up neural stuff. And it has to do with the emotions, has to do with like the stuff we repress, has to do with shadow self.
That's what like these people like have. It's not that they can't dream; it's that they don't. Their emotions are just gone. No need for them. It's like they threw them out, cut it off.
Yeah, so it
They're
like it limits us.
They're all psychopaths. I mean, the people who control us are psychopaths. So it's like they don't feel much.
And that's really interesting because there are these like big creatures that like some children might experience. And when I was young, I never understood what these were. They like big kind of black cats that aren't black cats. I just knew they weren't what they seemed. And they were looking for me. They were sniffing the air. My son calls him Spitty. He calls him Spitty. And they're like these shadowy creatures that come trying to sniff you, trying to find you. And I had like this little dancing guy that used to come and dance and like do his thing, you know, do somersaults. And he wore this funky hat and this funky, like bright colors. And he was so cool. And he used to protect me. And so when I didn't know like that he was a leprechaun. Yeah, I didn't know about these things. I told my dad was like, oh my gosh, this is a bit freaky. I was like, no, Dad, these big creatures trying to find me and they're sniffing. Look, and my son calls them spitties. Lately, he's been seeing them again. Now he's been talking about the clown face, the killer clown face. I'm like, that's definitely part of this agenda of mind control that's been hidden into the media, subvertively hidden in, so that certain of these beings can use that archetype in order to engage with us on a fear-based platform, which is a little bit freaky. So he's noticed this killer clown faces and these things like that come at him at night and stuff, and which is interesting, you know. And I think that what it comes down to is that because our minds are always so busy, we have to compartmentalize. And the more that we compartmentalize, the more we have to push away our unconscious feelings. And so the shadow becomes highly empowered and highly energized. And that means that our neural pathways are like closed. So we have less potential to experience reality. So our senses become numb. Our sense of sound, where we can hear the ethers, where we can see the ethers, we can look at like a living thing and we can see the little dots and we can focus on it and we can see the energy and we can look at that and we can see, oh, there's bands of color in there, and we can sort of understand there's funny little currents around things, and each plant's got its own little currents and its own little dance of energy, and there's these different colors, frequencies. If you look inside those currents, you see there's colors. And so we have this natural ability through our physical organs to see the ethers and to see right through the ethers into the astral, to see the etheric shapes and forms that the energy takes, like little grids, and then to look in through that and actually see the qualities behind those shapes and grids of the actual energy that's filling that little energetic grid around whatever it is you're looking at. And we can't do this because our neural pathways are too busy on the back end. And so we need to integrate all of our neural pathways. And this is what we call the Ajna chakra. So the Ajna chakra is when you centralize your focus in your head and you don't allow this part of the brain to do that and this part of the brain to do that and this part of the brain. No, we're going to just sit here and we're going to focus here. So everything's looking in towards the center. And we were talking about the center of the cube and that origin. And I think this is how we transcend this physical form. And so these beings, rather than allowing us to look into the center and look inside our eyes, and you guys mentioned it earlier as well, you know, about the neon fish. I believe, Silas, you were talking about it. Without getting too lost in the conversation of it, in the source, as it were, there are cells in the pineal and cells in the optic region of the eye. These cells are triangular. They have a piezoelectric type of a quality. They are entangled because of vibrational resonance between the two. So there's a quantum entanglement. The light stimulating our eyes generates inside of our pineal gland a reaction. And this is why melanin and other hormones are generated, melatonin, so that our sleep cycles and our awake cycles are controlled by how conscious we are, based upon this, which stimulates serotonin, dopamine, and everything else to keep the body moving and energized so that you can do things, and to keep your emotional energies part of this consciousness field. You obviously need the serotonin, very important. So this basic, these cells are very similar to the cells on these fish that generate these lights under the sea. And when we stimulate our eyes with light, then we stimulate our internal cells, which actually generates light inside our eyes. So when we're in deep state of meditation and people are seeing light and color, they don't realize they are actually seeing light and color. They're not imagining it. Enlightenment isn't some metaphor that's out there in woo-woo land. It's literally that the pineal gland is generating light that goes right through the claustrum and actually contacts the pituitary gland directly, which is attached to the hypothalamus.
Do you know
so there's light running through the head, and this stimulates the fluids. Yeah.
Do you know what's really interesting about that as well? You see that same thing crop up in the phenomenon of the prisoner's cinema, where prisoners that were in oblates or really dark dungeons, they would begin to see that. Their mind after a while would begin to actually create geometric shapes and light, like what you're saying, because it's there, like it's everywhere. It's even perhaps coming out internally from us. It's something that just it's there. It's present. Yeah.
It's interesting too. I remember earlier, Silas, you mentioned something based on what Franklin was talking about regarding the color blue, and how there was like an aversion to blue. I think you were saying that in some of the more occult circles, and well, the blue light basically from our computers is actually really harmful to our cells, and the red light from the sun is apparently like what keeps our mitochondria healthy. So there's that aspect to why they might be having an aversion to blue as well, because they know from the occult teachings that they've learned what light is healthy to intake into the eyes and what is unhealthy.
I think that blue light isn't necessarily unhealthy. I just
it's
think
the type
that
of blue light. Yeah, it's like the frequency of it and the amount of it that we're getting.
The amount of it. I think it's like that. It's like your
We're
body
not
needs a
getting
certain
enough.
amount of arsenic to be healthy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But you OD that arsenic and it becomes toxic. And I think the same could be said, like if there was too much red light, the reaction would be cancer. Like, okay, let's say you're growing a can of bus, right? Let's say you got a special tent with special lights and you want to increase your yield of your can of cannabis. Then what you do is you increase the far red light and you reduce the blue light. Increasing the far red lights, you see, far red light causes cells to be bigger, causes them to become bigger. And the blue light actually causes cells to become smaller with a thicker wall, which is more protected. So blue light causes things to crystallize, red light causes things to expand. So too much red light would cause tissue to become bigger, cells to become bigger. So if we were giants in the past, it was because there was more red light, far red in the frequency of the sun. And the far red in the frequency of the sun would have made each cell a little bit bigger. And each cell being a little bit bigger would make up a percentage, 10%, 15, 20% more substance, which would make you 15, 20% bigger.
Well, it's like the vapor canopy type of idea too, right? When, I mean, I think people like Jack Cruz, who, I mean, I don't know if he's correct about everything, but he's like, he basically says we're so overloaded with blue light from the LEDs now that like as much sun as you can get, man, as much red light as you can get, you won't get cancer. Like he's pretty convinced of that. I've even heard him say if you have skin cancer, it's just more sun, which I have no idea if that's true or not. So I'm not giving medical advice to anyone, but
I think he's right. Like more sun is actually the secret to good health. And I agreed, like up to a point, obviously once again, you can OD on too much of a good thing. It's like saying more water will detoxify your body. Yeah, but if you drink too much water, it will actually flush all the nutrients from your system.
We've all had experience where we got burnt by the sun really bad, I'm sure, like where it was not a good thing.
But like I've been, as you can see, like myself a good tan going on here. Dun, dun, dun. I'm quite happy with my tan.
Well, the only time I've been burnt by the sun really bad was out here in California, where I think there's also like a lot of artificial light and horrible, like the atmosphere is horrible. So the sun I'm getting isn't the best either. And I wasn't out in the sun for a while before that. And then it was just like a whole day out in the sun. And and I was also cloudy that day. So it was like, so my own
Do you wear
fault.
sunglasses?
Not really. Sometimes I do, but I try not to.
Because I believe, and I don't know this for a fact,
Virtue,
but I
probably
believe that
virtue.
sunglasses tell the eyes one thing, and
Yeah.
that tells the skin one thing.
That's
You
why I
actually
try not
want
to.
the UV touching your eyes so that your eyes can tell your body, listen, kick out the defenses. The same like a cannabis plant, you know?
Exactly.
You put extra
That's-
UV onto that plant and it's going to actually produce THC to protect itself. And we've got similar chemical reactions in our skin that will actually bring out more of the vitamin D, which is actually going to create oils, which is actually going to protect us.
100%.
It's like everything in the world. It follows the sun. Even plants, they'll grow in the direction of the sun. It's quite interesting. And of course, this is why, just on a purely exoteric level, the sun was always the god. In large part, it still is. Of course, Christ is very much a symbol of the sun, amongst being a symbol of other things, right? In the more esoteric aspect, but exoterically, I mean, Christ is the sun. He's got a halo. He's usually has either a halo above his head or behind his head. So it's always there, isn't it? Even the cross of the sun.
Well, even looking at
dictating the cycle of it.
that chakra system that Franklin just had up before, like the intertwining one. I mean, that's like Steiner, not that one, the other one of the person, where it had like I mean, that's like how Steiner has like his solar system model of like the planets following like the sun and this sort of corkscrewing.
Oh yeah, that's exactly that's the toroid. I mean, if you were to look at the toroidal moment when it's established, you have this ring of, I forget how many toruses it is now, but it looks like a zodiacal wheel, and you have this torus made up of a ring of toruses, and those toruses themselves are made up of rings of toruses that are vertically stacked, and then those vertically stacked toruses are made up of individually horizontally stacked toruses. So of course you get the crucifix idea too, right? And but ultimately that is infinitude, and it's the sort of the pervading structure of the cosmos. What you're seeing there, that's just looking at it from a sort of sectioned view. But if you were to look at it from, be it either, a sort of orthographic projection or whatever, you would see the cross. You would see the 8-rayed star, because that is the center of the torus. The cross itself is the sort of geometric shape that's formed by the sort of geomagnetism, the magnetic fields that's produced from that 0 point of the creation of the torus. It's similar to, of course, the tornado. The eye of the storm will always be peaceful, and from that peace emanates this, sort of calamity that all moves in one direction. It's it's pretty much that. I mean, everything in even our modern society, if everything is a shadow of a shadow, a dream of a dream, it's all Maya, it's a lila, a cosmic stage performance, then of course they're attempting to recreate that through programmatic code. So it's literally in the act of their transgressions, they acknowledge not just God, or whatever we want to call it, the prima causa, but they acknowledge the entire structure of the cosmos. They almost reveal it. It is the apocalypse. It is the era of revelation. This is why you have this sort of a Highlander-like quickening,
Yeah. They have to do everything faster now before too many people figure out.
Exactly.
What's going to become evident.
There's a very interesting recent film that I watched called Heretic, and it's got Hugh Grant in it.
I've been wanting to watch it. I'm going to watch that soon.
Oh man, you have to watch this. This
Yeah,
is
I told Maggie about it. We're going to watch it soon. So
this is a really quite a good film, and highly symbolic. The whole thing is an allegory, right? Essentially, you know, not spoiling it, but Hugh Grant is the demiurge, and he's you know, basically states to them, of course, you've got the Dante Alighieri's Tria Prima there, right, where he goes from hell to from Inferno, Purgatorio, and then Paradiso. So you've got that Tria Prima there of the sulfur, Mercury, and Sol, or whatever we want to call it as well, Vili, Ve, and Odin. And he says, you've got to go down to get out. When they say, well, how do we get out? Oh no, you can't get out of the front door because that's on a sort of timer, right?
Yeah.
And only I can open it. So now that you've been tricked into coming into this loop, the only way out of this place is because his cabin's on the edge of the mountain, is you've got to go down to get out, right? And of course, the mountain is associated with El Shaddai, Bel Shaddai, Shaddai, from the Akkadian of the mountain. The Emperor card, where the Emperor sits is the master of the ruins. All around him is this barren place where nothing grows, but he is sitting there proud in this sort of Aryan or Martian symbol of power. The folly of power, a sort of Ozymandias type of power. And that's what Zion means, by the way. A lot of people don't realize it, but it's a compound word. And it comes from Sia, or Si, which is quite literally barren or desert in Hebrew. And then On, which was the Hebrew transliteration of the Kemetic Yahweh or Yanu, which sounds very much like Yahweh. But it was in Kemetic it means pillars. And it was the holiest city that the Greeks knew as Heliopolis, or the city of the sun. This is another name they use for their utopia, by the way.
Well, that's right. Remember earlier when I was like the animal wheel or animal circle actually is also, there's a word, Zio ion, that connects to this. Yeah. So.
Well, it was the same that we brought up with the ration, rat, eon, right? It's the same idea that the rat is this relentless force that feeds off, I guess, the waste of individuals. So it's the same. It's very much akin to George Bataille's work, which I would hope no one reads. It's absolutely horrific. It's very interesting, but God, oh my God, the guy is wow. How his mind worked, I can only, even just peering into the book, it was a bit of like, it was like going into Hellraiser. I've just figured out the cube, and I forget what the name of the demons are, but they've took me into their world. I was like, oh my God, right? That's that finished. Never read that again. But
I know what you're talking about. I can't. Weren't they like oh shoot, dang, I can't remember the name of it actually. I knew that I feel like Thomas Sheridan brought them up during the lockdowns and stuff.
Ah, yes, he did. Yeah, he did. As a sort of allegory.
Shoot, there goes my camera, boys, and I have to actually hop off here now. If you guys want to continue, go ahead. I have to actually run and get the girlfriend for more. So that's
all right. Yeah.
Well,
good timing for me.
God bless you, Chris. Travel safe. Travel well.
I had an amazing time. Awesome conversation. I'm so glad we did this for real. Silas, come back.
So
anytime.
good honor having you, man. Big love to you and your missus.
Absolutely,
and I hope you
brother.
guys have a lovely romantic sunrise.
And we only have a few hours still.
It's sunrise there, isn't it?
It's only 2:30 a.m. right now, so 2:20.
Okay.
So it's so we got a little time. But Franklin, I will be on with you next week, I'm sure. Silas, come back anytime, have more discussion for this. And if I don't see you guys before that, hopefully maybe on the round table if I can get myself up on Saturday.
Big love, brother.
I may exit as well. I'm going to get some breakfast.
Well, I was just getting to the point of like we're running out of time, so I'm
Yeah, I've
Perfect.
just realised the time as well.
Hey, we
Wow.
did a solid almost 4 hours, so that's a lot.
Yeah, no, definitely. We definitely dropped that bomb. But to everybody in the chat, I hope you guys got what you came for. I hope you enjoyed the show. Look forward to having you guys in future. And I suppose this conversation is going to have to sort of continue on. Probably the next step is going to be somehow relating to the morality of the story, which is in itself a huge discussion, I think, potentially, you know, in how maybe the hows of this process, you know, what it is that we can do as well, in order to, this word is a dodgy word, protect ourselves, you know, to keep ourselves stable and equilibrated in a world that wishes to disseminate and take us apart into pieces and keep us dysfunctional, and how to become more functional and more sort of in control of our choices and be able to become sovereign. You know, that's a word which I believe comes from the root of sober-minded, Jupiter. So, you know, the principles of being mentally sober and being able to be in control of the way in which we choose to relate to the reality that seems to be under control, but also transcends control, which is an interesting concept. Free will, I think, is a part of the discussion. What do you guys think as the natural progression of this conversation?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we've sort of highlighted and painted a picture of the control, but I think we have to discuss more of the mechanisms that we can explore and take and to perhaps, you know, parse this to overcome it, to transcend it.
100%. Silas, do you want to rejoin us next Tuesday?
Yes.
Or next Wednesday? It'll be Wednesday for you, I guess.
I'll say that tentatively I will be there, but something may come up. But I should be there. I should be there.
Awesome. All right, guys, I'm gonna hop out. You guys are awesome.
Well, big love to both of you. Namaste to everybody in the space. Take it easy, enjoy your day, and keep smiling. Remember, when you smile, the bones in your head contorts, and it puts pressure on these two bones. They put pressure on the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, cause a bit of secretion of the good juices, keeps you happy. And it also brightens up somebody else's day, which causes them to also contort the shape of their heads, putting a bit of pressure on the pineal and the pituitary, so that we can all live in a more positive and productive space. Big love, big blessings. Keep it sweet, keep it real. Bom Shiva.